Chapter 228. Holy shit, that kid actually broke the KJ-350 composite gun in half. Bell commented from time to time as he watched the fight with great interest. Sillin didn't say anything, but he was also paying attention to the discussions around him. Most of the time, the information provided by the bystanders was far better than the information provided by the main character. It didn't take long for Sillin to figure out why the two sides were fighting. It was because of the noble Blazing Hawk. When the Blazing Hawk Falvig's men arrived on the planet, everyone on the planet knew about it through the advanced communication network. Everyone on the planet was already on the move. Be it the lesser nobles who wanted to curry favor with the Blazing Hawks or the commoners who craved recognition, they were all making preparations. Of course, Baron Bader Academy paid close attention to this news, so the students were already asking around for information. Because of the arrival of the Blazing Eagles, the competition between the two sides became even more intense. The nobles said that the commoners were delusional, but the commoners quickly retaliated. In the last semester's comprehensive rankings, more than 60% of the top 100 were commoners. This was a disgrace that the noble students had always felt. In the end, the two sides started fighting. A closer look would reveal that both sides were holding back, which was why the school's security guards were able to watch from the sidelines. As long as there weren't any major incidents, the school would turn a blind eye to the fight between the two sides. To put it nicely, it was exciting competition. However, right now Sillin was puzzled. Why did a commoner have the guts to pick a fight with a noble here? Weren't they afraid of the nobles' retaliation? It wasn't that Sillin thought poorly of the nobles, but there were far too few people like Bell. Back on old Chang's planet, the few nobles he'd seen looked down on others with their noses raised high, as if to say, "Don't piss me off or I'll kill you." It was hard to compare to the current situation. Sillin asked Bell directly because he didn't understand the situation. After all, Bell was a real noble. "Bell, is there little difference between the commoners and the nobles in the school?" Bell rubbed his chin. "That depends on the school. The better the school, the smaller the difference in treatment. As for Baron Bader, although I've never heard of it before, according to the materials, since it's ranked in the top 10 in this star region, it has the ability to reduce the difference in treatment between civilians and nobles. After all, Baron Bader once produced an honorary scholar of the RES, and it's possible that the honorary scholar will be promoted to an academician of the RES soon." Bell smacked his lips and tossed the empty bottle into the trash can. "That honorary scholar is from the 23rd sector of the Empire. He received his secondary education in Baron Bader when he was young, but he was picked up by a school in the sector where the imperial capital is located because he excelled too much. After that, he entered the Royal Academy of Sciences and became an honorary scholar. Isn't there a lot of space in the introduction of the school in Baron Bader about the honorary scholar coming back to his alma mater to give a speech?" Of course Sillin knew that Baron Bader had produced an honorary scholar, but he didn't think that it would be enough to make Baron Bader compromise to such an extent. It was because he had seen the difference between nobles and commoners that Sillin was surprised to hear that a commoner could argue with a noble student at Baron Bader, and the school didn't seem to care at all. Bell chuckled when he saw Sillin's surprise. "That's the RES we're talking about. It's no small institution. It's the RES. My old man tried to push me into it back in the day, but I failed. I have no talent in my head." Bell pointed at his own head, but he didn't sound depressed. It was as if he was talking about something normal. Bell told Sillin a bit about the RES, and it was only now that Sillin realized that nobles weren't the only ones standing at the top of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The RES was the highest academic institution and research center in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. It was also the highest hall of honor for researchers. It was an independent institution that wasn't directly under the control of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Interestingly enough, 70% of the RAS's members were commoners, not nobles. It was also worth mentioning that the current president of the RAS was a commoner. This alone was enough to force some nobles to think carefully when dealing with certain issues. Anyone who could enter the RAS was no weaker than some mid-level nobles, especially the few veteran researchers. Even the royal family had to be polite to them. After all, they played an important role in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire's development. The RAS was the authority of academia, just like the League of Stars' League of Stars Research Institute. The RAS also had academicians, but academician was an honorary title that recognized a person's academic ability. Although it wasn't divided into several ranks like the League of Stars, the RAS was still divided into two categories: honorary scholar and academician. In the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, the academicians of the RAS had a lot of responsibilities. Aside from their own research projects, they would regularly attend meetings held by the RAS's various departments to discuss recent scientific progress and report on the latest scientific developments. They would also participate in all kinds of academic seminars organized by the RAS's interdisciplinary committees. Sometimes they would accept commissions from noble companies to do research and development work. They would also accept invitations from famous schools to give lectures and give lectures. They would also participate in all kinds of scientific awards and evaluate the overall strength of middle and high-level schools. The Mist Bodhisattva Empire was an empire that worshipped science and knowledge. That was why the academicians of the RAS were highly respected and held high social status. They were no longer commoners or nobles, and they enjoyed special privileges in certain places. In fact, they were even more privileged than some nobles. There were many times when a noble's family business would need to hire the RAS's guidance if they wanted to develop properly. One could imagine what would happen if a noble completely offended the RAS's people. The monarch and the three kings mostly respected the RAS's people. Did your family have more influence than the monarch and the three kings? It didn't matter what kind of society they lived in. People who worshipped academics and devoted themselves to them were all the same. They had their own worldview, and they had their own beliefs no matter who they were facing. The main reason Baron Bader was able to become one of the top 10 academies in the Star region was because they had the right to show off their RAS's honorary scholar. That was why Baron Bader was always looking forward to the appearance of the next honorary scholar. Every year, there would be a few people who were accepted into the Empire's famous higher education schools, but none of them ever made it into the RAS. In fact, every year, the school of Baron Bader invested more effort into the commoners than the nobles. After all, nobles were always at a disadvantage when it came to academic competitions. You couldn't expect those noble students who only knew how to dress up and flirt with girls to do research for you, could you? That was basically impossible. Of course, it wasn't like one group of people could kill a whole group of people. There were many capable people among the nobles, and there were also some who came from noble backgrounds in the academy. After all, the RAS wasn't a place where you could get into just because you had connections. There was no absolute relationship between IQ and character, and there was no absolute relationship between IQ and family background. The better the school, the more peaceful they would be with the commoners. As long as you had the ability, you could enjoy the same treatment as the nobles, or even better. "Yo, the fight's almost over," Bell said. Sillin looked over. The school's security guards had already gone up to stop the fight. Both sides were bruised and battered, but their injuries weren't serious. At the very least, they weren't life-threatening. By the time both sides had left, the onlookers had mostly left as well. "Let's go find Little 3 and Little 4, Sillin said as he stood up and dusted off the grass on his clothes. Bell placed his palm on his forehead and looked around the school buildings. "Where are we going to find them? Dormitories? I think they're about to start class." "Sillin, that electronic bulletin board over there shows the overall ranking of the students." Huimao pointed in a direction. There was a large bulletin board not far away. It was used by the school to announce the results of the comprehensive test. Let's see if we can find little 3 and little 4's names. Scylla and Belle walked over to the bulletin board. Since the board had been showing the overall ranking for quite some time, there weren't many people around to see it. Belle looked through the top 100 names of the first grade and sighed. I don't see little 3 and little 4. Yes, they are in the 31st and 37th place. Scylla pointed out the names to Belle. 31st Chang Xiao and 37th Chang Fu? Not little 3 and little 4? Little 3 and little 4 are just their nicknames. Chang Xiao and Chang Fu are their real names, Scylla explained. I see. Scylla moved his finger on the control panel below the notice board and pointed at little 3 Chang Xiao and little 4 Chang Fu's names. Their classes, and the location of their classes were displayed. Inside the school's surveillance room, someone said, Huh? There are 2 people checking Chang Xiao and Chang Fu's information today. Speaking of which, aren't Chang Xiao and Chang Fu commoners? All the information recorded on the bulletin board would be displayed in the surveillance room. They are indeed commoners, another person said. They were in the 80s during the entrance test, but now they're in the top 50. They have great potential, but no one has ever checked their information before. The 2 of them didn't pay much attention to it after that. After all, things like this happened all the time and they were already used to it. On the other side, Belle and Scylla were preparing to go to Chang San and Chang Si's classroom. There were still 2 hours before the end of class, so Scylla and Belle decided to take a look around the school first. The school's environment was pretty good, but there were plenty of young boys and girls in the secluded woods. Most of them were the children of nobles. Belle even went to eavesdrop on them with a perverted look on his face. Scylla's face twitched uncontrollably. So this is the real prince of the Blaze Eagle royal family. If the citizens of Mist Bodhisattva Kingdom were to learn of this prince's behavior, they would definitely be horrified. Huimao jumped back onto Scylla's shoulder after running into the bushes to catch small insects. There was still pollen at the corner of its mouth from eating 2 large butterflies. Licking its paw, it wiped the corner of its mouth and patted Scylla. Let's go, it's going to rain soon. Scylla looked at the sky and saw that clouds were indeed starting to float over. However, it didn't look like it was going to rain. Even though it didn't look like it, Scylla still did as Huimao said. He gestured to Belle and ran to the vending machine to buy 2 umbrellas. He had planned to buy 4, but there were only 2 left in the machine. Even with the rapid advancement of science and technology, these primitive tools hadn't been eliminated yet. Not many changes had been made to them. Many people preferred to use these primitive tools in the rain and experience the world being washed away by the rain. In many places, people couldn't see the rain and nature of nature. As expected, 5 minutes later, the clouds in the sky suddenly grew thicker and the rain began to fall. Some young couples hurriedly abandoned their rendezvous, and some even remotely controlled their flying cars to pick them up. Some of the crazier kids were holding hands and running in the rain, laughing loudly. Belle ran over and caught the umbrella Scylla threw at him. He opened it and cursed. The sky was clear just now, and now it's raining? What kind of shitty weather is this? It's worse than our AF3. AF3? Scylla asked. Belle flicked the water off his hair and raised his chin proudly. He was about to say something when he looked around to make sure no one was around. Then, he whispered, I'm studying at the RES-affiliated Third Higher Education School, or AF3 for short. What do you think? Jealous? Belle didn't try to hide it. He knew that Scylla had already guessed his identity, so he was more than willing to admit it. Scylla, on the other hand, didn't have much of a reaction. Given Belle's background, it wasn't strange for him to study at a good school. It wasn't hard to imagine how important a school with the prefix, RAS, was compared to other schools. However, why AF3? There's AF1 and AF2 in front of it? Belle curled his lip. There are only 3 higher education schools affiliated to the RAS, and our AF3 is the most normal. The other 2 schools are filled with freaks. Bell shook the goosebumps on his skin, as if he had thought of something terrifying. He turned to Sillin and said seriously, "It's true, they're all freaks. If you hear of anyone from AF1 or AF2 in the future, you have to be careful, or you'll end up miserable." Sillin nodded. "Got it." Bell didn't talk too much about AF1 or AF2. Instead, he talked about how he and his two bad friends were at AF3. They were the famous three dissolute swordsmen of AF3. They didn't have a lot of good things to say, but they had a ton of bad things to say. Bell was talking excitedly when Sillin asked, "Speaking of which, you're still in higher education, aren't you?" Bell's voice came to an abrupt halt. "Ahem, about that. I need to adjust my mindset from time to time. I can't just throw myself into my studies. My brain is small, and I can't take in so many complicated things at once. I have to clear my memory every once in a while." Sillin was amused. "You think you're in the right?" Of course, Sillin wouldn't comment too much on other people's business. Everyone had their own way of thinking. Bell felt a little awkward. To distract himself, he pointed at Hui Mao. "What's that cat listening to?" Sillin looked over. Hui Mao wasn't even paying attention to their conversation. His ears were perked up as he listened to something intently. From the frequency at which his whiskers moved, Sillin could tell that the cat had found its prey. This guy would move his whiskers at a certain frequency whenever he heard the sound of prey. Sillin flicked Hui Mao's ears. "What did you hear?" Hui Mao smiled sweetly. "Frogs." "Frogs?" Bell's eyes lit up. "When I was in AF3, Xingming, Canuo, and I caught frogs and roasted them back at the dorm. They were delicious." Under the eager gaze of a man and a cat, Sillin headed to the place Hui Mao said had frogs. There was still an hour before Little 3 and Little 4's class ended. They still had time. There was a lotus pond in Baron Bader that was filled with frogs. Unlike normal frogs, these frogs didn't go through a metamorphosis period. In other words, they didn't go through the stage of tadpoles. Instead, they directly developed into frogs. The lotus pond was huge, and the weather in Baron Bader was perfect for the growth and reproduction of these frogs. Frogs could be heard croaking most of the year. However, many nobles didn't bother to catch these slimy creatures, and some civilians didn't have the guts to do so. After all, in Baron Bader Academy, it was good enough that they could enjoy relatively equal treatment. They didn't dare to catch the frogs in the lotus pond. Some nobles saw them catching frogs and laughed at them. After that, very few people came to catch frogs. Maybe it was because the students of Baron Bader didn't attack the frogs sitting on top of the lotus leaves carelessly that the frogs had grown bolder. They didn't even move their legs when they saw Sillin and Bell walking towards them. Only when Bell caught him with a smirk on his face did he croak, then fall silent as Bell skillfully knocked him out cold and tossed him aside. "One. Keep going. We have to get at least one dish." Bell was very skilled at catching frogs. He held an umbrella with one hand and grabbed a frog near the road with the other. Hui Mao had already jumped into the pond to play. There were plump fish and stupid frogs in the pond. It was enough for him to play for a while. Sillin put the frogs that Bell knocked unconscious into his bag, and thought about how he was going to eat them later. While Chang San and Chang Si were listening attentively in class, they would never have imagined that these two people who were older than them by more than 10 years and should be much more mature were currently catching frogs in their school's lotus pond. Chapter 229. The rain had stopped for 20 minutes or so, but it suddenly started pouring again right before the end of class. The rhythmic sound of music rang out. It was the end of the class bell, and it was also the chorus of the school song of Baron Bader. Many students rushed out of the classrooms in the teaching area. The wealthier students who had smart flying cars directly walked into the cars that were already parked there, so they didn't need to be drenched in the rain. Some people came to pick them up, while others waited for the school bus. A few noble students came out together and boarded their flashy flying cars. Then, they made a 180-degree turn and threw the dripping rainwater onto the people around them. Looking at the people who laughed and left, the rest of the people pointed at the back of the car and cursed. Chang Fu the Fourth and Chang Fu were doing homework in the classroom. It was raining heavily outside anyway, so he didn't bring an umbrella. He could save the money for the school bus ride. Chang the Third, Chang Xiao, was reading a book next to Chang Four. It was a book she had borrowed from the school library yesterday that described the main characteristics of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire's star regions. Chang the Third and Chang the Fourth were twins, but their personalities were very different. Chang the Third was always smiling, just like her name. Chang the Fourth, on the other hand, rarely smiled. She was always lukewarm except for a few people she was particularly close to. A girl walked over while the two were busy. She could tell that Chang Fu came from a wealthy family. Chang Fu, I have an extra umbrella. You can borrow it. The girl placed a double-layered foldable umbrella on Chang Fu's desk. The umbrella was about 3 meters wide when opened. It was enough for Chang Fu and Chang Xiao to use. Before Chang Fu could refuse, another shrill voice rang out. Yo, trying to curry favor again. Say, Lunani, you're a noble, aren't you? You're a disgrace to us nobles. The speaker was a girl about the same age as Lunani. She was dressed very well, with shiny chains around her neck and wrist. Chang Xiao closed her book and looked at the frowning and impatient Chang Fu. She sighed. What a low EQ guy. She had to mediate every time. Chang Xiao was about to say something when a cat's meow caught her attention. Why would there be a cat in a classroom? What's more, it was a rainy day. Chang Xiao followed the sound and saw a Hui Mao squatting on the windowsill, staring at them with its round eyes. Who? Chang Xiao cried out in surprise. Chang Xiao and Chang Fudong had met Hui Mao when they were watching a video at home. Seeing Hui Mao, Chang Fu, who had always kept a straight face, also revealed a trace of a smile. If Hui's was here, it meant that Silin was also here. Chang Xiao closed his book and quickly packed his things. He thanked Lunani and left with Chang Fu. Silin and Belle were standing outside the school building with umbrellas in their hand. When they saw Chang Xiao and Chang Fu, Silin waved them over. Brother Silin, when did you arrive? Chang Xiao asked. I came here at noon today. Taking Chang Xiao's bag, Silin opened up the second layer of the umbrella to cover the area. Silin and Chang Xiao shared one umbrella, while Belle and Chang Fu shared the other. Belle, on the other hand, was quite talkative. He didn't stop talking on the way to Chang Fu's dorm, from the fight they'd witnessed at the school gates to where they'd gone to catch frogs at the lotus pond. Watching Chang Xiao and Chang Fu leave, Lunani waved her hand and a pink flying car flew over to her. Lunani jumped into the flying car and swung the car, throwing all the rainwater at Sharapova, who had been making sarcastic remarks just now. Just you wait, Lunani! Sharapova stomped her foot and hopped into her red flying car. Perhaps she was too angry that she lost control of her car, and it collided with another flying car next to it, causing another commotion. Still, things like this were common enough. The two left cursing at each other. Chang Xiao and Chang Fu's dorm rooms weren't far from each other, but everyone was heading straight to Chang Fu's room to roast frogs. Every dorm room had 4 bedrooms and 1 living room, and every student had a 15-square-meter bedroom. They didn't have to pay for their accommodation fees, and the top 100 students were free of charge. However, most of the students here were commoner students. Noble students preferred single apartments, and they would rather pay a high rent than live with commoner students. Someone had already returned to the dorm room, and the bathroom was running. Hearing someone's return, the boy opened the bathroom door and was just about to jump out naked. Luckily, he reacted fast enough to stop himself midway when he saw a stranger and a girl in the room. Hee, so it's Chang Xiao, the boy said a little awkwardly. Everyone knew about Chang Fu's twin sister. Chang Xiao rolled her eyes at him. She knew the personalities of Chang Fu's roommates very well. His name is Kurt and he's my roommate. Chang Fu introduced him simply. After Ku Te greeted him, he retreated back to his shower. Not bad. When he saw Chang Fu and the others, Silen thought that he was reminded of his time at Seven Lights. Sigh, I'm still homesick. Bell didn't think too much into it. He went to the kitchen and rummaged through the stuff. Finally, he dragged out a dusty simple grill from under the groceries, washed it, and began to process the frogs impatiently. Silen didn't help Bell as he watched him skinning the frogs with practiced ease. The guy could do it all by himself. While Bell was taking care of the frogs, Silen called Chang Xiao and Chang Fu into the room and gave them the card with 100,000 MB worth of money. Old man Chang gave it to them. He then explained the current situation of the shop to them. This carry has 100,000 MB on his card. The shop is much better now and the standard of living is much better. You don't need to be too frugal. You're still growing and you can't starve. You won't be able to keep up if you lack nutrition, and you won't be able to pass the general evaluation, am I right? A while later, Silen came out of the room. His main purpose this time was to pass the card to them and pass their new identification documents to them. The moment he walked out of the room, Silen saw Bell and the boy named Kurt squatting next to the grill and working on it. Bell was sharing his own experience. The more primitive the grill, the better. There's no way the sealed automatic grill machine can make a frog taste as good as the former. Speaking of eating this thing, Silen shook his head. Gluttons like these were everywhere. Seeing Chang Fu and the others come out, Kurt turned around and said, "Oh right, Lu Jie said he'd bring us food. Should we tell him not to?" Lu Jie was their roommate, and he dragged them to the cafeteria the moment class was over. Chang Fu nodded. "I'll tell him." He took out his communicator and dialed Lu Jie's number, but the call didn't connect even after a long time. Chang Fu dialed again and the call connected this time. However, the person on the line wasn't Lu Jie, but another roommate who was closer to Lu Jie. The call was cut off again before he could even say two words. However, the image that popped up on the communicator showed the situation on the other side. It was a mess. "Another fight?" Chang Xiao asked. "Doesn't look like it. Something must have happened." Chang Fu dialed the number a few more times, but no one picked up. He picked up an umbrella and walked out. "I'm going to the cafeteria to take a look." "Hey Lil 4. Chang Xiao saw Chang Fu run off without looking back, so she turned around to look at Silen. "Big brother Silen, I'm going to take a look too." "Sure, let's go together." Silen grabbed the umbrella and walked out with Chang Xiao. "Wait for me." "Hey kid, you stay here and roast the frogs. You have to be careful not to burn them. If you burn one, go to the lotus pond and catch another one to make up for it," Bell said as he poked Kurt's forehead. Kurt wanted to cry. The lotus pond was so far away from here. There were quite a few cafeterias in the school. Lu Jie and the others liked the one closest to the training grounds the most because it had the most meat and portions. Before Chang Fu even got close to the cafeteria, he saw a group of people at the training grounds in the distance, shouting and shouting in the heavy rain. They really were fighting again. Chang Fu rushed over. Lu Jie and the others were easy to find because they were usually the vanguard of a fight. However, Chang Fu couldn't find them even after searching for a long time. He casually grabbed a person to ask. This person was also a commoner student. Right now, his eyes were bloodshot from fighting. "These damned nobles. They injured Lu Jie and Tai Tuesday. They've gone too far. I'll fight them to the death." After saying this, the child rushed back into the fray. Injured? Seriously injured? With Lu Jie and Tai Tu's abilities, they were considered to be at the top of the school, especially Tai Tuesday. He was a fourth-year student, and his overall grades were always in the top 3. His individual battle prowess was quite outstanding. Chang Fu had never heard of Tai Tu being heavily injured. If that was the case, then this fight would no longer be a small one. Just as Chang Fu was looking for Lu Jie and Tai Tu, his communicator rang. "Chang Fu, don't get involved. This isn't a simple matter. Hurry up and leave." It was Lunani. After all, she was a noble with a decent rank, so she knew some things better than others. However, Chang Fu didn't pay attention to her warning. He had already seen Lu Jie. He squeezed through the crowd and went over. During this time, he had already been punched a few times, but just now, he saw a flash of cold light. A knife? One had to know that in order to not cause too much damage, no lethal weapons were usually used in a fight. However, Chang Fu really did see that flash of cold light. Chang Fu was also very sensitive to sound. The sound of a knife cutting through raindrops, the sound of a knife hitting a person, there was no mistaking it. It was a knife. Someone had actually broken the rules. Lu Jie and Taitu were lying on the ground. On the surface, they didn't seem to be injured, but the two of them were extremely weak. They didn't even have the strength to stand up. Even the slightest movement would cause them pain. Every raindrop that landed on their bodies felt like a heavy hammer. Lu Jie, Taitu, how are you guys? Chang Fu, be careful. After receiving Lu Jie's warning, Chang Fu dodged to the side and leaped several times, leaving his original position. Just then, a chill brushed past his clothes. Chang Fu didn't even need to look to know that the back of his clothes had been cut. However, before Chang Fu could even heave a sigh of relief, that cold light chased after him. It was too fast. At the same time, Chang Fu felt his movements become much slower. Compared to that cold light, he really couldn't react in time. If the other party had just casually attacked him earlier, then this time, he was going to kill him. With this knife, Chang Fu would definitely be in an even worse state than Lu Jie and Taitu. Pa. The sound of a knife breaking rang out. Before the knife could reach Chang Fu, Silin used his finger to break the knife's edge, then grabbed the person's neck and smashed him into the ground. Since when did adults have to be so ruthless in a battle between children? As Silin spoke, the body of the person who had been smashed into the ground slowly elongated. With the crisp sound of bones cracking, the person who looked to be about the same age as Chang Fu and the others had already transformed into a burly adult man. F***ck, this is fucking cheating. Lu Jie, Taitu, and the others finally understood why something was wrong. Previously, they had only thought that these people looked unfamiliar and were much stronger than them. At first, they thought that they were just experts that the nobles had recruited. They didn't expect that these bastards would actually find outside help. Seeing that his comrade was still in his original form after being smashed into the ground, another person rushed out from the battlefield and charged at Silin. You motherfucker! Before the person could finish speaking, Bell had already rushed over and sent him flying with a kick. When the person landed on the ground, there was a huge splash. Bell propped up his umbrella again and stuck one hand into his pocket. He said slowly, "What a bunch of scum. Sigh, you've lost all the face of the nobles. You're even cheating in such a lowly way. You really can't do anything." Compared to the three swordsmen of AFS, these people were truly pathetic. Silin curled his lips. This bastard is even trying to act cool now. Crack. The sharp sound of something shattering attracted the attention of many people. Silin threw the broken knife in his hand to the ground. If anyone moves again, they'll end up like this knife. Someone tried to slip away, but Silin smashed him into the ground before he could even take a single step. No one dared to move again. Silin's movements were too fast. One moment he was there, the next moment he was somewhere else. They weren't inexperienced people, and they knew that this was the difference between them and Silin. Their eyes couldn't even keep up with Silin's movements. They couldn't even see what was happening with their eyes. A flying car flew over and landed. A middle-aged man with a fat belly walked out of the car. He asked in surprise, "Hey, what's going on? What's going on? Who are you two? This is Baron Bader Academy. Who are you? Where did you come from? Not everyone can enter this place. Are you two from one of the trashy schools around here? Don't disturb the students of Baron Bader." "Oh, it's the Vice Dean," someone said sourly, emphasizing the word vice. lackeys of the nobles. They're all the same. Trash. What the hell? Bah. The commoner students scoffed at this vice head of teaching, and all of them had good expressions on their faces. Master, I don't know where these two came from. They're probably from one of the trashy schools. Or maybe they didn't even go to school. The noble students sneered. They'd always been fearless. Even if they were the ones who broke the rules first, they were nobles and enjoyed special privileges. The school had to give them some face. Did these commoners really think they were future academicians of the Royal Academy of Sciences? Commoners will always be commoners. They deserved to die. The vice-director walked up to Sillen and Bell, and was about to say something when a couple of noble students accused him of something. He was about to say something, but when he saw Sillen lift the man off the ground and smash him down, he swallowed his saliva and swallowed his words. He couldn't help but feel like an empty shell in front of Celine and Belle. The situation was at a stalemate. The nobles didn't say anything either. None of them wanted to be the first to stand out. After the deputy director of teaching arrived, the security guards finally arrived. The vice-dean straightened his back a lot when he saw the guards rushing over. He pointed a thick finger at Belle, who was trying to act cool, and said, "You, I'm talking about you. You don't have any manners, and you don't have any manners at all. You're obviously an uneducated person." The vice-dean of students began to lecture Belle in the same manner he usually did when he lectured his students. It was obvious that he knew Sillen wasn't a pushover, so he went straight for Belle, who was pretending to be cool. Sillen sighed inwardly. It was time for the vice-dean to die. You said that the real prince of the Blazing Eagle royal family had not received any education. Even if he had no manners and was sloppy, it was far from your place to speak. The Blazing Eagle King did not care. So what qualifications do you have to speak? Belle stood in the same position as he listened to the vice-dean's lecture. Belle smiled. You're asking me who I am? I'm not going to change my name. I was just about to eat a frog. Everyone. So cold. What did not going to change my name have to do with I was just about to eat a frog? Besides, who cared if you were eating a frog or a duck's egg? When Sillen saw that the vice-director was about to continue, he immediately sat on the back of the person lying on the ground and kicked the person's restless feet. Behave yourself. The man froze when he heard Sillen's words. He didn't dare to move. Others might not know why, but he knew very well that the person sitting on his back might not be old. But the aura that was released in that instant was so powerful that he didn't dare to move at all, and he obediently let himself be gripped. Killing intent? Not exactly, but it was scarier than killing intent. He didn't know why, but this person was terrifying. He was like a gun hidden behind a fog. You didn't know where he would be, or when he would put you in his sights. He couldn't afford to provoke the nobles, but he didn't want to provoke this person either. The best thing to do now was to pretend to be unconscious. The vice-dean was trembling with anger as he glared at Belle. No matter what you asked him, he would answer with a completely irrelevant answer. From the looks of it, this brat still had a sincere look on his face, as if he was telling the truth. You, which school are you from? I'm going to talk to your principal and teachers. How do they educate their students? I'm afraid you don't have the right. Let me tell you, I know all the principals of the top 10 schools. Regarding this, the deputy head of teaching was very proud and was quite proud of himself. Oh, I see. All right then, prick up your pig ears. I'm from AF3. Go talk to our principal, he likes to be talked to. Chapter 230. AF3? The name was too vague. Be it intermediate education or advanced education, there were too many schools with AF3. The only difference was the affiliation. Therefore, when Belle said that he was from AF3, everyone was trying to guess which AF3 he was from. After all, no one would think of the top AF3 in the first place. The third advanced education school affiliated to the RES was either a top noble or a genius. Geniuses were everywhere there, and any one of them was enough to make other advanced education schools fight over it. Many schools would fight for the second place in the empire, but no one dared to mess with the first place. It was the acknowledged boss. As for the advanced education schools affiliated to the RES and AF2, they didn't participate in the ranking. They weren't even on the same level. In other words, they weren't considered traditional advanced education schools anymore. The rain in Barenbader came and went as quickly as it came. A rainbow floated above the man-made lake not far away. However, no one was in the mood to look at the rainbow. The school guards had surrounded the area, and the school doctors were busy treating the injured. The conflict had caused a lot of damage, and some of the students might be in danger if they weren't rescued in time. The school doctors glanced at the broken blades on the ground and the broken metal utensils. They turned around and focused on treating the injured. It was better not to get involved. The deputy head of teaching was not stupid. He did not say anything when he heard the words AF3. After all, there were 2 advanced education schools with the words AF3 in the star sector. They were not bad. He even planned to send a batch of graduates there. He had to get to the bottom of the kid's background first. If the kid was close to the leaders of the 2 schools, he'd have to think twice. However, the vice dean of students couldn't afford to be weak in front of so many students. The vice director of teaching put his hands behind his back and straightened his back. Gathering his strength, he pointed at Bell with his chin and said in what he thought was a dignified tone, "Which AF3 are you? What's going on?" Before the deputy head of teaching could finish his words, he was interrupted by a loud shout. In fact, the voice of the person who interrupted the deputy head of teaching was not too loud, but it was imposing. It was different from the deputy head of teaching, who was weak on the inside but weak on the inside. Hearing this voice, people would feel a sense of awe. The deputy director of teaching's imposing manner, which he had worked so hard to build up, suddenly dissipated. When he heard the voice, he swallowed his words and his expression changed. He squeezed out a smile on his chubby face and looked in the direction of the voice. The crowd parted on their own, and a flying car landed not far away from them. A man wearing an imperial military uniform, and judging from the epaulets on his shoulder, he was a major. He was slightly older than Sillen and Bell, but he could still be considered young. There were a couple of people behind the major. Sillen didn't recognize them, but the other students did. From the students' whispers, Sillen learned that the people behind the major were the headmaster and the vice-headmasters of Barenbader Academy. The fact that the principal of an intermediate school was standing obediently behind the major showed that he wasn't a simple man. Some of the people who had been fighting with each other earlier lowered their heads when they saw the major, but that only served to expose themselves. After a few bangs, a few people who weren't Barenbader's men were kicked out from the crowd and returned to their original adult forms. Just like Sillen, the students didn't see the major's movements clearly. They only heard a few thuds before they were kicked out of the crowd and sprawled on the ground. The young major sneered. He didn't say a word, but his laughter was enough to make the people on the ground tremble in fear. The vice-dean, who thought he had a lot of energy before, was now silent. He didn't even dare to make a sound. He glanced at the principal and hurried over to him as if the principal was his savior. The major was aware of the vice-dean's actions, but he didn't bother to pay attention. He swept his gaze across the crowd and paused for a moment when he saw Celine. Then, he swept his gaze across the others. Bell was on the other side, his umbrella closed. The crowd was blocking his view, so the major didn't notice Bell at first glance. His gaze wasn't sharp, but it was extremely oppressive. It was as if a giant hand was strangling them by the neck and pressing them to the ground. Most of the students lowered their heads to avoid eye contact with the major. Even the guards didn't dare to look him in the eye, except for Sillen. After scanning the crowd, the major said, "I'll give you 3 seconds." Less than 3 seconds after the major's words left his mouth, A few people who were not students of Baron Bader High School walked out from the crowd. The ferocity of the previous fight had disappeared, and each of them stood in front of their companions who had been kicked to the ground like little wives. They didn't dare provoke this man. Even their boss had to be respectful in front of him, let alone small fries like them. Scram! I'll deal with you guys later. The group sighed in relief when they heard the major's words. They dragged their fallen comrade to the side, but they didn't dare to go too far. If they did, they'd die. However, as they walked, they glanced at the comrade that Silen was sitting on. The comrade wasn't pretending to be unconscious anymore, and he was blinking at them for help. The students who were about to scram noticed the comrade's pleading eyes and looked at the major, who was standing there like a gun. They didn't even have the courage to open their mouth. As soon as the major tilted his head in their direction, the few of them no longer paid any attention to their miserable comrade, and scampered off to one side. The major looked at Silen again, then walked straight towards Silen. "Major Tosin." The headmaster was about to say something, but Tosin shot him a look and forced him to swallow his words. He stood there awkwardly and turned to look at the vice director of teaching who was running towards him. He finally found a punching bag, but he didn't dare to speak loudly. Bell didn't go over. Although he hadn't seen Tosin in person, he knew who he was when the headmaster said the name. Before coming to the 23rd star region, Bell had done some research on the people in this star region. Among them was Tosin. Nahachi Tosin. Every noble family had their own influence in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. For example, the Sizer family was famous for their flying car manufacturing industry, and the Nahachi family was very influential in the military. Although they weren't as influential as the monarch and the three kings, they were still one of the giant. The Nahachi family had produced many famous generals, and many of the envoys the students studied under had the surname Nahachi. Tosin was almost 10 years older than Bell, and he was also a graduate of AF3. Even now, his name was still on the list of outstanding graduates of AF3. It would be hard for Bell not to know about the man who used to be famous in AF3. His teachers often used Tosin as an example in their classes. Even though Tosin was walking towards him, Silen didn't look like he was going to back down. He stared straight at Tosin without any intention of backing down. It wasn't that Silen was arrogant, but Silen knew from the first moment he saw Tosin that he couldn't show weakness in front of a person like this. If he did, he would lose everything. It was all about strength, not status. Tosin looked a bit like Knight. That was why Silen felt a sense of familiarity when facing Tosin. It was the same feeling he had when Knight first stood in front of him. Tosin stared at the young man in front of him. Tosin was a few years younger than him, but he didn't show any signs of weakness. He was the one sitting there, and it was the kid who was looking up at him, but Tosin felt like they were at the same level. Every one of them had a unique aura that was either strong or weak. When Silen and Tua's Sun got closer and closer to each other, their auras clashed against each other, causing the surrounding people to feel as if the air had thickened a little. Tosin didn't stop until he was right in front of Silen. He didn't say a word and reached out to grab the person Silen was sitting on. His movement wasn't fast, so everyone around him could see it clearly. What happened next, however, was a blur for the students. Silen grabbed Tosin's wrist, flipped over, and launched an elbow strike at Tosin's throat. At the same time, he used his knee to knock back Tosin's leg. However, Silen's elbow strike didn't succeed either. It was blocked by Tosin's palm. It was obviously just a palm, but it was like a steel shield that stopped the attack. Not only did it stop, but it also pushed back. Both of them had fast reactions, and each attack was faster than the last. At first, the students could still see a little shadow, but as time went by, it became blurry. They could only hear the sounds of bangs, but they didn't know what happened to the two. The time the two exchanged blows was very short, no more than 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, the two had exchanged dozens of blows. Moreover, both of them only needed one hit to make the other lose the ability to fight. When the students could see clearly again, Sillin and Tosin were still standing there. However, their positions had changed. Tosin was standing next to the person Sillin had knocked down, while Sillin was standing where Tosin had been. The students could only see the result of the exchange from the clothes of the two, but unfortunately, they couldn't see anything. Both of them looked the same as before. However, now many people were somewhat afraid of Sillin, especially those who had rolled to the side. Now they were quite glad that they didn't attack Sillin, or else they would have been crippled. They didn't know how many times they had been crippled by Tosin or Tosin's subordinates. Otherwise, they wouldn't be like mice that had seen a cat when they saw this person. Tosin moved his palm. It was a little hot and numb. He didn't expect this kid to be so strong. At the same time, Tosin was also shocked by Sillin's strength. Others might not know, but Tosin himself was very clear. Others might be surprised that Sillin was able to fight with Tosin without being at a disadvantage, but Tosin knew that he had already lost. He didn't need to touch his gun to know that the gun in the holster had fallen apart. The only thing that had caused the gun to fall apart was Sillin's fist that had brushed past his clothes. That was the only opportunity that could have allowed the kid to do such a thing. Tosin didn't expect that the kid wouldn't be able to return empty-handed. The corner of Tosin's lips curled up. He wasn't the slightest bit annoyed at his loss. He kicked the person on the ground with his heel, resetting the dislocated bone. Although it was still painful, he could at least get up and walk for a bit. Moreover, he would rather endure the pain and roll away than stay with these two. "What's your name, kid?" Tosin looked at Sillin, his eyes emotionless. Even if he admired Sillin, he didn't show it on his face. "None of your business." The words weren't spoken by Sillin. Before Sillin could open his mouth, Belle had already rushed over to answer. In this place, the prince was the only one who dared to shout at a major like this, and this major was a great noble no less. Tosin's face visibly stiffened when he saw Belle striding toward him. The corner of his eyes twitched and twitched again. Why the hell did I run into this little ancestor? It made sense though. Even the two Blaze Eagles were here, so it wasn't strange that this little ancestor would be here. However, running into this little ancestor wasn't a good thing. Tuo Sun was well aware of the famous hedonistic sons and daughters of the nobility. Most of them were arrogant in public, but they had to lower their necks in front of their own fathers. Belle was an exception. He wasn't even afraid of the Fire Eagle King, and there was no one in the entire Mist Bodhisattva Empire who didn't know that he was the most reckless and unreasonable person in the empire. Tosin curled his lips. "I didn't expect to see His Highness here." His Highness? The people around him were dumbfounded, especially the vice director. He wanted to die right now. What the hell did he do just now? Did he just point at the prince and lecture him? No matter which royal highness it wasn't someone he could say anything to. Moreover, the three royal families were famous for their bad tempers. This was bad, this was really bad. This time, it was really hard for him to absolve himself from the blame. Chong 3 and Chong 4's mouths fell open in shock. Is this really a prince? Is there a prince with ears like this? He was just skinning a frog in the kitchen just a moment ago. The principal and the others finally realized what was going on. A prince? Could he be the prince of the Blaze Eagle royal family? Only the Blaze Eagle royal family had come to this place. Some of the students had thought of the possibility as well, but they didn't dare say anything after what had just happened. Belle ignored everyone else's reaction and looked at Tosin like he was a thief. He nudged him and said, "Aren't the military supposed to be a bunch of busy people? Don't get involved in this. Go back to your own business, you don't have to worry about this." He then looked at the principal who was twirling his fingers. "The school will take care of this, right?" Of course," the principal promised. Even though he was a noble, his family's social status was nothing compared to the royals. To be honest, a single word from Belle could force him out of office. "There's no rush. I'm just here to take a look at the campus. I heard it's a great place to relax. Why don't we find a place to talk? Even though it was a question, Tosin's expression suggested that he had already made up his mind. There are many places to talk in the school. I'll arrange them for you, the principal said hurriedly. No need. Belle cut him off. We shouldn't get involved in military matters. We're just normal students after all. We won't be involved in military matters while we're still in higher education. The vice dean's heart skipped a beat when he heard Belle say that he was still in higher education. Fortunately, he fainted right away. Since it was His Royal Highness, which other EFC3 could it be? I can't say for sure. I was also involved in military missions while I was still in school. Tosin waved his hand carelessly. You said it yourself, not us. We're just bad students who don't want to learn. We just want to have fun, Belle said like a spoiled brat. Let me tell you, don't talk to us anymore. Billy pulled Celine and charged out. Hey, Your Highness, let's talk. Nope. Just give up your heart. It was rare that Belle remembered to catch the loophole in Angor's words as he ran. Tosin smiled as he watched Belle drag Celine away. Just you wait, kid. Ignoring the people around him, who were still confused by their conversation, Tua's son walked back to the flying car and drove it away. The principals had finally regained their authority, and were now directing the guards and medical staff to deal with the situation. Those who had been forgotten by the side looked at each other. In the end, they obediently went back to find Tua's son to be punished. This time, not only would they have to stay in jail, they would also have to suffer physical pain. Sigh. Tosin returned to the place the school had arranged for him. He took out his gun holster and poured out the parts inside. With a flick of his fingers, he quickly assembled the parts into a perfect gun. Tosin looked at the gun and put it back into the holster. He tapped his finger on the table, deep in thought. The two lieutenants behind Tosin exchanged a look when they saw the smile on their superior's face. Their superior was probably up to something again. Belle dragged Celine back to Chang For's dormitory. The first thing he said was, Celine, don't be tricked by that guy. Don't go to the military. Don't join the military. Damn it, he's trying to poach the Fire Eagle royalty? No way. Not even a window. Celine thought to himself, since when did I become a member of the Fire Eagle royalty? Although it was a hierarchical social system, the various major powers still valued some outstanding talent. Poaching and snatching people away from others was not uncommon among the various powers. Let me tell you, the military is hard and tiring, and you can't get anything good. I bet you won't even get a wife. You're a bunch of men, and you might not even see a single girl for a few years. Think about it, it's great now. You can do whatever you want, pick up girls if you want, and be as carefree as you want. Why would you go to the military and ask for trouble? Belle rattled off a long list of the disadvantages of the military, but Celine just nodded. The prince must have suffered a lot in the past, or he wouldn't be able to speak so profoundly and with so many vivid expressions on his face. Beside him, Kurt held a few roasted frogs in his hands, unable to get a word in. Chapter 231. Celine felt like Belle was possessed. Why did he say that? Maybe it was because he'd brought up too many of Belle's tragic past experiences. Belle was in the middle of recounting the 7th time his father had beaten him to a pulp and thrown him, along with Olegano of the Blizzard Wendiska royal family, into the royal army to train with the guards when his communicator rang. Belle furrowed his brows when he saw the unknown code on the communicator. He accepted the call. Your Highness Scoble. Tuasen's face appeared on the screen. Beep. Belle immediately cut off the call and blocked the number the moment he saw Tuasen's face. Where were we? Belle asked Celine. Celine made a 7 sign with his fingers. Oh right. The 7th time I was caught. Belle was about to continue when his communicator rang again. He looked at the code and saw that it was from Muso. What is it? Belle asked impatiently. Muso's smile was a little stiff. Your Highness, Tuasen just said, Beep, Bell cut off the call and took off the communicator on his wrist. He looked around the room before throwing the communicator into the oven with a thud. Sillen. Was it necessary? On the other side, Muzo stared at the disconnected communicator with a wry smile. He turned to the other side of the room and saw Toasen's image on the screen. You saw how stubborn His Highness is. He won't give face to anyone. Plus, we've never had any face in front of His Highness. All right then. I'll contact Prince Zhen Xingming and have him contact His Highness Scoble himself. Tuasen put his legs on the table after ending the call and propped his chin up with his fingers. Originally, he wasn't looking for Tuasen because of Sillen. He was looking for him to pass on a message. Before coming to Baron Bader, Tuasen had run into Zhen Xingming of the Fuji royal family on a planet. He asked Tuasen to pass on a message to Bell and ask him to find him there. But now, it seemed that Bell didn't want to hear Tuasen's voice at all. He was guarding against Tuasen like he was a thief. The more it was like this, the more curious Tuasen became. Although he had only exchanged blows with Sillen for 2 short seconds, those 2 seconds were enough to prove Sillen's strength. Other than that and the fact that he had unholstered his gun without realizing it, what else did Sillen have that Bell would treat him this way? Although Bell was an unreliable prince with an unorthodox way of thinking and often acted foolishly, every member of the royal family wasn't as simple as they seemed. Bell might seem like an idiot sometimes, but sometimes he was more cunning than a fox. To be able to make him want to pull Sillen into the Fire Eagle royal family like this, just what was it for? He looked at the information his subordinates had gathered on Sillen, but it was so little that he couldn't glean anything from it at all. Not to mention that the Sizer family was behind all of this. It was obvious that the truth about Sillen had been obscured. Just what kind of person was a person that even the Sizer family and a prince of the Fire Eagle royal family had a grudge against? The joint military exercise was drawing near, and everyone was busy trying to find good seedlings. Otherwise, Tuasen wouldn't have come to Baron Bader to try his luck. After all, every school had their own special talent. They were trained specifically for the military, and their curricula were all geared towards military development. Baron Bader was Tuasen's 5th stop. He hadn't found anyone he liked in the previous 4 stops, and he didn't expect to find anyone outstanding in an intermediate school. But he didn't expect to run into someone like Sillen here. Sillen didn't give Tuasen the impression that he was a student at all. He reminded Tuasen of the people at AF1 and AF2. However, there was something about Sillen that was clearly different from them. Why was that? He was like a killer, but he was different from them. He was like the people at AF1 and AF2, but he was clearly different from them. It was too hard to understand. It was no wonder that Tuasen couldn't figure it out. After all, hunters didn't make up as many people in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire as they did in the League of Stars. There were hunters in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, but they were much weaker than the hunters in the League of Stars. The great nobles had absolute control over manpower and resources, and the royal army and the Empire's joint defense force would never allow a large organization like hunter regiments to appear in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. If they were searching for rare minerals or exploring an unknown star region, the great nobles would pay a huge sum of money to gather a group of people to do it, and the rewards would belong to the great nobles. Therefore, as a hunter, Sillen could not be understood by others. Unable to think of a reason, Tuasen took the communicator and keyed in a series of characters that looked like a combination lock. A while later, the call connected. A beautiful blonde woman with a hot body appeared on the screen. Yo, little Tuasen, how did you find the time to contact me? You haven't contacted us since you were demoted. We miss you so much. If it was anyone else who heard this hot girl's words, their imagination would definitely run wild. But Tuasen shivered and hurriedly said with a smile, Teacher Griffin, please don't miss me. I can't withstand your torment. Although Tuasen used to study at AF3, he had gone to AF1 and AF2 for training. Those training were very helpful for Tuasen when he carried out military missions. Among the people who trained Tuasen was this blonde beauty, Griffin. Although Griffin had a hot body and looked to be in her 20s, this AF2 teacher was actually about the same age as Tuasen's grandmother. She was also very skilled, and she even had the military rank of colonel on her back. Tuasen couldn't help but shiver when he thought of the terrible situation during training. "Teacher Griffin, I have something to ask you today. I want to ask you about a person." Tuasen, who had a dignified look in front of Principal Barenbader and so many other people, was still an obedient student in front of Griffin. He was even more obedient than he was in front of his father. "Sigh, I knew you would be like this, little heartless person. When you have nothing to do, you don't even think of us. Only when you have something to do, you remember that there are people like us." Griffin twirled a strand of her hair around her finger and sighed. Tuasen smiled awkwardly. He knew that Griffin wasn't angry. This was just their usual way of talking. "Tell me, who do you want to ask about? I'll say this first, don't come to us asking for people. I can't bear to throw them to your damn place." "So in your eyes, the 23rd Military Region is a damn place. Ahem, here's the thing. I want to ask, is there a person named Silen in AF1 or AF2? Oh, I have his image here." Tuasen played Silen's image for Griffin to see. The image was the moment when Tuasen first took Silen away. Silen sat on the person who was lying on the ground and raised his head to look directly at Tuasenator. After looking directly at Tuasen, Silen's eyes looked at the flying car behind Tuasenator. It was the car that Tuasen drove over, a military flying car. There was a surveillance camera on it, and Silen was looking in the direction of this surveillance camera. And the surveillance camera only captured this part of the video. Griffin couldn't see the look in Silen's eyes when he looked at Tuasen, but the moment Silen looked at the monitor, that look. Griffin narrowed her eyes. Her fingers that were playing with her hair had already let go of it, and she gently rubbed a canine tooth along her red lips. When Tuasen saw Griffin like this, the hairs on his back all stood up. As someone who had been through this, he knew too well what this habit of Griffin's meant. In this case, their military region wouldn't be able to get people over. "Ahem, this. Ms. Griffin, since you're busy, I won't bother you anymore, A soft and slightly raised tone of voice made Tuasen not dare to hang up the communicator. He obediently waited for Griffin to continue. "Little Tuasen, tell me, what's this kid's name again?" Griffin asked. "Silen," Tuasen answered obediently. In his heart, Tuasen had already cursed himself 1,000 times. How could he be infected by that idiot Belle? He couldn't think straight and actually went to Ms. Griffin. It's over, it's over. He went for wool and came home shorn. So his name is Silen. Little Tuasen, when do you have the chance to get Silen over to me?" Griffin said with a bright smile. Tuasen wanted to cry. "Get him over? How am I supposed to do it? This. Ms. Griffin, it seems a bit difficult." Tuasen's voice became smaller and smaller. "Tell me about it." "Ugh, he's not only backed by the Sizer family, but also the Fire Eagle Royals. I also want to get Silen over to our 23rd MR, but that Scoble guy is guarding against me like a thief. I can't find a chance." Hearing Tuasen's words, Griffin snorted and laughed. "Little Tuasen, you're really living more and more backward after being sent to the 23rd MR. Never mind. I'm in a good mood today, so I won't argue with you. Don't worry about Silen, I won't let any military region drag Silen into it." These words sounded a bit arrogant. How could a mere schoolteacher and a colonel have the confidence to say something like this? There were so many military regions in the Empire. How many generals were there? How could a colonel like you have the right to speak? However, this was exactly what Griffin was capable of. Tuasen was very clear about this. Moreover, many generals were under Griffin's command. "Yes, ma, I am. Good boy." Tuasen let out a long sigh of relief after Griffin finally disconnected from the communicator. Although it had been a few years since he left the academy, he still couldn't help but shudder at the sight of this teacher. It's like I did something bad. Tuasun rubbed his chin. Forget it, I won't inform Belle and Sillen. Belle won't let me finish my sentence anyway. I'll let them worry about it when the time comes. Now it seems that even if the 23rd MR couldn't get him, the other military regions wouldn't be able to either. After ending the call with Tuasun, Griffin turned on a holographic display and flipped through the records inside. She found a video record and compared it to the one Tuasun showed her with Sillen's image. The look in their eyes was too similar. But of course, he knew his own student very well. He knew what kind of experience, personality, and habits he had. But what kind of person was Serene? It seemed that there were still a lot of treasures hidden away from them. Right now, Sillen was eating roasted frogs with Belle, Chong 3 and Chong 4. He had no idea that he was being targeted by a lot of people. After taking care of Chong 3 and Chong 4's business, Sillen was about to return to Old Man Chang's place. However, Belle picked up a call and dragged Sillen to another planet in Sector 23. Before he departed, Sillen contacted Old Man Chang to learn about the shop and Chang Xiaowu's recovery. However, he didn't use his own communicator. Instead, he used the public communicator of the Vice Director of Education's office. In Belle's words, they didn't have to pay for the communication fee. Compared to Sillen's own crappy communicator, the images were much clearer. It would be a waste not to make use of a ready-made resource. The Mist Bodhisattva Empire was a good choice. All of its subsectors were connected to the same communication network, so communication was much easier. Sillen and Belle hadn't even stayed in Barenbader for a day, but the commotion they caused was enough to be recorded as one of the 10 most influential events in Barenbader's history. Because on this day, some people in Barenbader saw the Prince of the Fire Eagle royal family, who was studying in the 3rd Advanced Education School affiliated to the Royal Academy of Sciences that everyone dreamed of. They saw Major Tosin, who was born a great noble, fighting a young man to a standstill. Although the two fought for a short time, and no one could see their movements clearly, they saw the principal and other leaders of the school trembling in fear before them. Regardless, Chong 3 and Chong 4 were no longer looked down upon by the nobles. In the eyes of others, they had the support of the Prince of the Fire Eagle royal family. The school leaders also saw them as seedlings with a bright future. Kurt, the one who helped them roast the frogs, often bragged about how he once sat at the same table as the prince and ate roasted frogs together. As for Serene, he seemed to have become a burden, a foil that was placed beneath the Prince of the Fire Eagle royal family and Major Tosin. Only a small number of people paid more attention to Sillen, and this small number of people would go on to achieve great things in the future, including Lu Jie and Tai Tuesday. Sillen and Belle sat on Belle's 4-passenger spaceplane and flew toward Jen Xingming's planet. Muzo and Ikiki stayed behind to smooth out the waves caused by their departure. Inside the spaceplane, Sillen rubbed the area where the leaf pattern ring was. Sillen had put on a pair of gloves not long after he arrived at the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. This was one of the reasons why Belle hadn't discovered the secret on Sillen's finger until now. Genya once said that the ring would resonate with him when he was sent home. But when would it resonate? Would it resonate with a direct descendant of the Gen family? Would Jen Xingming, the son of the current King Fuji, cause the ring to resonate with him? Sillen was looking forward to it. Chapter 232. Belle's spaceplane wasn't stopped by any patrol ships on the outskirts of the planet, nor did it receive an identity verification request from the Defense Network. Belle's spaceplane flew straight to the planet unimpeded. Inside a patrol ship on the outskirts of the planet, a couple of patrolling soldiers exchanged worried glances with each other. The reason why they didn't intercept and inspect the spaceship was because their scanner had already scanned the identity code on the spaceship. Based on the identity code in the scan result, they knew very well what kind of person this spaceship belonged to. It was a spaceplane belonging to the Fire Eagle royalty, and judging from the numbers on the code, the owner of the spaceplane must have a very high status in the family. Who would have the guts to stop it? It didn't take long for Muzo and Ikiki to arrive as well. The patrolling soldiers quickly reported the situation to their superiors when they saw the large blaze eagle emblem. Muzo and Ikiki were in charge of dealing with the planetary government. Bell never did anything about it. He took out his new communicator and started contacting people. "Hey, where are you? I'm already here. Come out and welcome me." Bell was answered with a beep. "Fuck. That bastard must be hitting on a girl again." Bell wasn't really angry. He brought up the control screen on his communicator and began searching for the coordinates of Jen Xingming's signal. Then, the spaceplane automatically moved to the nearest large parking lot. Jen Xingming was currently in the city. After parking the spaceplane, Bell and Silin walked to their destination together. It was nighttime right now, and it hadn't been long since the start of the night. The rich nightlife in the city made it just as lively at night as it was during the day. The colorful screens in the city center shone brightly and proclaimed the city's vitality. Silin looked up and saw a shining skyscraper not far away. It was like a road sign that guided people to this area. The skyscraper wasn't the tallest building in the city. There were a lot of buildings taller than it, but it was the tallest in this area. In other words, this area was not an area filled with tall buildings. In this prosperous area, what was important was its uniqueness, not its height. There were all kinds of buildings of all shapes and sizes, and every one of them had their own unique style that would make people remember them. For example, Silin and Bell's destination, a bar. From the outside, this bar looked like a goblet filled with wine. You could even see the building behind the wine glass through the glass. The color of the wine in the transparent glass changed. Transparent, clear yellow, intense red, azure. There was a hint of longing in the illusion, adding a sense of mystery and ambiguity. The people who entered seemed to have disappeared into the cup of pure wine, and no one could be seen from the outside. This was actually a special kind of building material that made light deceive people's vision. To be able to design and build the bar like this, it could be seen that the owner of the bar had put in a lot of effort. After entering through a door at the foot of the cup, what he felt was completely different from the outside. It was divided into several areas, some with a more flamboyant and free style, and some with a more leisurely and romantic style. After entering the door, he could see a hint, and according to the style he liked, he could go to different areas and enjoy the atmosphere that suited him. Bell went straight to a more flamboyant area. As soon as he walked in, he was greeted by an explosive rhythm. Huimao wagged his tail and moved his claws along with the rhythm. The atmosphere here is so familiar. Of course it's familiar. Silin could still clearly remember the time when Huimao and Lycrabe were dancing at Acerella's dance night in the League of Stars. Flicking the restless Huimao on his shoulder, Silin walked in as well. Bell looked around. He didn't need to search to know that there was a circle of people on the dance floor, and Jen Xingming was in the middle of that circle. Right now, Prince Jen Xingming was dancing with a beautiful girl in a tight miniskirt. His hands were still wandering around the deep cleavage between her breasts. The people watching the dance screamed and whistled frivolously, but the two people on the dance floor didn't seem to be affected at all. Bell curled his lips. No wonder the guy ignored his communicator. He's busy picking up girls. Look at how they're flirting with each other. He looked around and noticed that all the girls' attention was focused on Jen Xingming's face. Bell couldn't strike up a conversation even if he wanted to. He looked around and noticed that all the women's attention was focused on Jen Xingming's face. Bell couldn't strike up a conversation even if he wanted to. He still wasn't as strong as Jen Xingming. Silin found a place to sit down. There were free drinks and snacks here. Huimao squatted on the table in front of Silin and swayed left and right to the beat. It lifted its paw and nailed a piece of flaky pastry. It ate and watched while commenting in its heart, "Their dancing skills are not as good as Lycrabe's." What would Zhen Xingming think if he knew that he was being looked down upon by a cat? The dance ended. Belle yelled, "Oh, another one!" Zhen Xingming glanced at the screaming Belle not far away. He understood what Belle was trying to say all too well. On the surface, he was telling Zhen Xingming to keep jumping, but what he really meant was, "If you keep jumping, I'll smash this place down." Zhen Xingming let go of the woman's waist and whispered something into the woman's ear. Then, he walked off the dance floor and walked towards Belle. "You're finally here." Zhen Xingming punched Belle's shoulder. "Why didn't you contact me earlier? Why didn't you tell me you were coming to the 23rd star region?" Belle punched him in return. "How dare you say that? Didn't I tell Tua Sun to tell you to contact me on your own?" Belle was usually the busier one. He wouldn't talk to anyone unless it was convenient for him. If Zhen Xingming had tried contacting Belle on his own, he would have most likely been ignored. Truth be told, Belle hated being interrupted the most when he was experiencing life. "Don't mention Tua Sun to me." "Then why didn't I get through to you after that?" Zhen Xingming tried to contact Belle more than 30 times, but he only succeeded on the last attempt. The first few attempts were all fruitless. "Oh, so you threw that communicator away and replaced it with another one. Forget it, I'll forgive you this time." Zhen Xingming raised his chin. "Let's go somewhere else and have a good chat." Belle called Silen over and said to Zhen Xingming, "This is Silen, my new friend." "Oh, that's Wheeze on his shoulder. It's a very smart cat." Hui Mao, who was a little upset at being almost ignored, shook his beard when he heard the word smart. He looked at Zhen Xingming proudly. Zhen Xingming didn't look at Hui Mao. Instead, he looked at Silen and felt a sense of familiarity. He clearly didn't know Silen, and he couldn't remember anyone who looked similar to Silen either. But why did he feel a sense of familiarity? In fact, Silen felt that Zhen Xingming looked familiar as well. Zhen Xingming actually looked a lot like Zhenya. In Silen's memories, Zhenya only looked like an old man, but if Zhenya was younger, he would look 60 to 70% similar to Zhen Xingming through complex analysis. However, Zhenya also said that he had no children. This meant that Zhen Xingming's elders had a close relationship with Zhenya. However, what puzzled Silen was that the ring didn't react at all in front of Zhen Xingming, the real prince of the Zhen family. Zhenya could only be sent back to the Zhen family when the ring resonated with him. If the ring didn't react in front of Zhen Xingming, then when and under what circumstances would it react? Belle noticed that both of them were looking at him strangely, so he asked, "Do you two know each other? Why didn't they look like they were looking at strangers?" Silen and Zhen Xingming shook their heads at the same time. "No." Seeing that he was being ignored again, Hui Mao whipped Silen impatiently with his tail. Silen scratched Hui Mao's chin in consolation. "All right, let's go." "Where are we going?" Belle nudged the slightly distracted Zhen Xingming. Zhen Xingming pointed upwards, "Up there." Zhen Xingming led Silen and Belle to the top floor of the bar. It was an open-air venue, and the place where Silen and the others were standing was right above the liquid of the glass of wine. The floor was like crystal when they walked in. It felt like they were standing on top of a crystal mine when they looked down. The surrounding walls presented an image that reflected the ambience. Because it was open air, the air circulation was good, and there weren't many people around. Therefore, it wasn't as stuffy as inside the bar. Zhen Xingming found an empty table for Belle and Silen to sit down at. He then chose a few drinks and snacks from the electronic screen that popped up. "What do you think? This place isn't bad, right? You should know that not just anyone can come here," Zhen Xingming said. Belle looked around and was a little disappointed to find that there weren't any single beauties around. He kicked Zhen Xingming. "Hey, what's the name of that beauty you were hugging and dancing with just now?" Zhen Xingming looked at him as if he were an idiot and answered, "How would I know?" Yeah, young Master Xingming never needs to strike up a conversation with a beauty. A voice sounded from behind Zhen Xingming. "Da Wei!" Belle exclaimed in surprise when he saw the girl walking over from behind Zhen Xingming. Dawei was born in a middle-class noble family. She used to be classmates with Belle and Zhen Xingming, but due to her rebellious personality, she didn't go back to school after completing her secondary education. Belle didn't expect to see Dawei here. Belle suddenly remembered something and pointed a finger at the bar. "Is this your bar?" he asked Darvey. "Yeah, not bad, right?" Dawei brought over the drinks and snacks that Zhen Xingming had ordered. "My sincerest apologies for troubling you, Miss Dawei." Zhen Xingming crossed his legs and picked up a nut from the plate. Dawei rolled her eyes at Zhen Xingming. "A freeloader has no right to speak." Pulling over a chair and sitting down, Dawei glanced at Silen before asking Belle, "Aren't you going to introduce us?" "His name is Silen." "Silen, this is Dawei. You can eat here for free if you mention her name in the future," Belle said bluntly. Silen knew that Belle and Zhen Xingming had a good relationship with each other when he saw how rude Dawei was. He also noticed that Dawei was a pretty forthright girl. There was no way she would be so close to Belle and Zhen Xingming otherwise. We circled around the bottles once and sniffed them. Then, it picked up a bottle and pulled out the cork with one bite. Then, it bent its front paw and grabbed the glass in front of Silen. Then, it bit the neck of the glass and poured the alcohol into the blanket. Zhen Xingming's eyes widened. "This cat sure is smart." Huimao shot him a disdainful glance before ignoring them. After filling the glass to the brim, it put the cork back in and crouched down in front of the glass to lick the alcohol. It didn't take long for it to finish. It licked its lips, repeated its actions, filled the glass to the brim, and drank again. The four people at the table watched as the cat drank all 4 bottles of alcohol Dawei brought over as if no one else was around. Zhen Xingming looked at Huimao's stomach, and then at the 4 empty bottles. "Where did this cat drink all its alcohol?" Silen made an "I don't know" expression. He knew that the cat's stomach was like a bottomless pit. In the past, the cat would hunt for big guys directly when it went out to hunt for food. Compared to that, these 4 bottles of alcohol were really nothing. However, Silen was worried that Huimao had never drunk so much alcohol in one go before. Would it go crazy if it got drunk? At the same time, Tuo Sun received an encrypted message on another planet. It was a coded message from Griffin. After deciphering the message, Tuo Sun hurriedly contacted some people in the military and the relevant personnel on the planet Silen, and the others were on. Right now, Silen was very troubled. Why didn't he notice that the cat was addicted to alcohol before? It was also a picky eater, and the only things it liked were the expensive ones. More and more empty bottles appeared on their table, and they were all brought over by Dawei of her own accord. Every time Huimao finished a drink, it would stare at Dawei with its round, watery eyes. Dawei's usually resolute heart immediately softened, and she would bring over more bottles. Zhen Xingming looked at Silen and said, 10 bottles now. It should be noted that the alcohol content of these 10 bottles wasn't low. Forget about whether or not Zhen Xingming himself could fit all 10 bottles. Even if he could fit all 10 of them, he would have collapsed on the floor by now. Why did it feel like the cat was getting more and more energetic as it drank? Dawei brought over another 5 bottles and watched excitedly as Huimao continued to drink. She didn't help pour the alcohol either. She simply watched as Huimao busied himself. She had never seen a cat act like this before. Belle scratched his forehead. Why did it feel like everyone had been reduced to the background? How could the 3 handsome men here not be compared to a cat with gray skin? Ahem, I say, Huru. Before Belle could finish, Huimao's body suddenly froze. His paw retracted from the bottle's mouth, shattering it with a crack. He looked up at a certain direction in the sky. What's going on? Belle and the other 2 looked at Silen in confusion. Logically speaking, Silen should know better as the cat's owner, shouldn't he? However, Silen was also looking in that direction with a serious expression on his face. Silen's intuition for danger was clearly higher than Belle and the others. Moreover, the cat was coming for them. Belle, Zhen Xingming, and Dawei also knew what was about to happen when they saw how cautious Silen was. There were a few people protecting Jen Xingming and Belle from the shadows around them. After all, they were two princes, and they couldn't afford to bear the consequences if anything happened to them. That was why there were always people protecting them from the shadows at all times. The people hiding in the shadows were also confused by the situation. They didn't sense anything out of the ordinary, did they? However, when a spaceplane slowly came into view, everyone realized that the people inside this average-sized spaceplane weren't simple at all. The spaceplane didn't use the cover of the night to conceal itself, as if it didn't care about being discovered. It flew a circle in the sky in a grandiose manner before arriving above a skyscraper not far away from the bar. The exit below the spaceplane opened, and 7 figures jumped out and landed on the roof of the skyscraper. The light from the skyscraper's surface and the giant lamppost on the roof illuminated the figures very clearly. Sillin didn't even need a remote device to see them clearly. The people who were secretly protecting Jen Xingming and Belle felt like their stomachs were churning when they saw them. It wasn't just the people hiding in the shadows. Belle and Jen Xingming weren't any better off. Their faces were dark and their bodies were tense. "Fuck, why are those freaks here?" Jen Xingming cursed. "Who are they?" Sillin asked. He had a feeling that these people were here for him, but he hadn't come to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire for long. According to Belle, he shouldn't have come into contact with people at the level of AF1 and AF2. Belle gulped and said with a bitter expression, "Those are the freaks from AF1 and AF2 that I told you about." From left to right, that's Soul Suppressor Ling Shi from AF1, Inaf and her brother Puno from AF2, Goryo from AF1, Biao and Zani from AF2, and the Black Panther next to Ling Shi is also from AF1. His name is Panther. Although they didn't want to run into anyone from AF1 and AF2 even if they were beaten to death, Belle and Jen Xingming had memorized some of their faces since a long time ago so that they wouldn't know how they got screwed if they ran into them in the future. However, they didn't expect to run into so many people from AF1 and AF2 at this time. A single person was enough to take them down, so who would be willing to go all out? If even Soul Suppressor Shi was sent out, then this was no small matter. Dewey had already contacted people to evacuate the bar. If a fight really broke out here, then the legendary AF1 and AF2 people might not even be able to keep this bar alive. At the top of the skyscraper, Ling Shi frowned when she saw the people on the top of the bar. Before coming here, she didn't understand why Griffin had sent out 7 people at once, but now she seemed to understand a little. Griffin once told her that she would understand when she saw Sillin. The black leopard next to Ling Shi wagged its tail and said, "Why do I feel like that kid's eyes look a little like white knights?" "Hearing you say that, I think so too," Biao said. "No wonder he looked familiar. So that's why." Goryo was sitting on the edge of a building with his feet dangling in the air. He didn't seem to mind that he was sitting on the edge of a 100-storied building at all. White Knight was a legendary figure in AF1, and Griffin once said that he had a pair of incredibly sharp eyes. When those eyes looked at you, they would give you the illusion that you were the prey. Hunter and prey. Even if the hunter was in the open and the prey was in the dark, when those eyes looked at you, all prey had nowhere to hide. Is this why Teacher Griffin values that kid so much? Elenaf rubbed her fist. Won't we know if we try? Ling Shi took a step forward and stood on the edge of the roof. Half of her foot was exposed, as if she would fall off if she leaned forward a little more. However, the others didn't seem worried at all. Ling Shi clasped her hands together and interlaced her fingers, then placed them by her mouth. As her fingers moved, a piece of music came from there. "Don't listen to that sound," Belle yelled at Sillin. He hurriedly covered his ears as well. Even though they were so far away, the sound was still clear when it reached them. The music whistled through the air like an explosion of life. It was a violent impact that disappeared in an instant, followed by a strong gust of wind that seemed to blow away one's soul. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, so hurried that no one was prepared for it. However, His mind was strained and oppressed in the high density of stagnation. All of a sudden, endless thoughts overlapped and overlapped. The soul that was restrained at the fingertips humbly begged for release. Then, an unstoppable force whistled through the air, then suddenly disappeared without a trace when no one was prepared for it. The sudden calmness and relief made people feel an indescribable sense of confusion, as if their lives were being drained hopelessly. A call drew everyone's consciousness over. It was a call hidden in the wind. The wind and clouds that couldn't breathe swept over, and the darkness seemed to be fading away. It was ethereal and ethereal. Their minds were blank. Some of the people who heard the music froze in their previous positions, but their expressions were blank and hopeful. They were already immersed in their own consciousness. Their senses seemed to be isolated from their consciousness, and they couldn't sense what was happening around them. Soul suppressor she. The reason why it was called soul suppressor she was because the sound seemed to be able to intimidate a person's soul and guide it. It sounded mysterious, but it was actually a kind of superb hypnosis, a natural hypnosis technique. It couldn't be replicated. Even recording the music with a recording device wouldn't be able to achieve such an effect. This was the main reason why Ling Shi was chosen by AF1. Belle and Zhen Xingming's backs were drenched in sweat. It took a lot of energy to resist the music. The music finally stopped, but Belle and Zhen Xingming grew even more nervous. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. What were these people going to do next? The people responsible for protecting Belle and Zhen Xingming in the dark were all experts of the royal family. Although they managed to resist the hypnosis, it wasn't easy. They didn't dare to use their guns carelessly against AF1 and AF2. The conflict would escalate if they did. However, before they figured out AF1 and AF2's goal, everyone had to stay united and observe the situation. It was fine as long as the two princes' safety was guaranteed. Ling Shi didn't move after the music stopped. Neither side made a move. They simply stood there in silence. Ling Shi and the others were analyzing Silan and evaluating Belle and Zhen Xingming's abilities. After all, it was quite impressive that they could resist the hypnotic music. On the other hand, Silan didn't seem to react to the music at all. This puzzled Ling Shi and the others. Zhenya had taught Silan hypnosis since he was young, and Silan had absorbed a lot of other techniques as well. His resistance to hypnosis had grown even stronger after the incident at Sector S's prison. Therefore, it wasn't easy to hypnotize Silan. Belle looked at Zhen Xingming and away. The three of them knew each other since they were young, and they had worked together many times in school. They could read each other's thoughts with a single look. The people from AF1 and AF2 never knew the meaning of courtesy, and they couldn't rely entirely on the people hiding in the dark. How were they supposed to come up with a foolproof plan? Silan sensed the unusual movements around him. He didn't need to worry about Belle and Zhen Xingming's safety. Naturally, there were plenty of people who would protect them. Silan was now certain that the people from AF1 and AF2 were here for him, and the battle was definitely going to break out soon. Right now, the only thing Silan was thinking about was how to fight them. After Ling Shi's music stopped, the surroundings suddenly became a lot quieter. Even the lights looked eerie under the night sky. Hui Mao had been staring at the Black Panther on the rooftop all this time. The panther's eyes were very hostile, and it was looking at him arrogantly with thick mockery and disdain. Disdain? What right did he have to disdain it? Meow meow, why the hell are you showing off, you black thing? The gray cat let out a roar, and the tense atmosphere collapsed just like that. The roar was so loud that the people and the panther on the rooftop could hear it clearly. The Black Panther's ears twitched a little before he looked at the others, especially Puno. He wasn't sure who the black thing the ugly cat was referring to. Puno thought, "You're the darkest panther here, and you're looking at me?" Silan put a hand to his forehead. The cat was probably going crazy from the alcohol. Normally, it wouldn't have yelled in such an unfamiliar environment in front of so many strangers without any scruples. It even had profanities in it. Mao leaped from the table to the wall and stood still. He raised his tail and pointed a paw at the Black Panther. "I've been annoyed by you for a long time. Come down and fight me." Sillen, Bell, and the others were speechless. The panther's beard trembled, and Goryo burst out laughing. "Panther, it's been a long time since I've seen one of my kind look down on you. Please don't insult the word, my kind. It's just a cat, not a panther. They've already issued a challenge. Are we going to accept it?" Puno looked at the panther. "Of course." Black Panther yelled and ran down the wall of the building. "Leave that panther to me. If I don't beat it up, it won't know why cats eat fish." With that, Mao jumped down from the wall. "Sillen, is Wheeze all right?" Bell asked uncertainly. "Don't worry about it," Sillen replied confidently. On the roof of the skyscraper, Enaf flexed her fist. "Let's go too. Let's go." Enaf, Biao, and Puno all unfurled a hoverboard that was similar to a hoverboard. The front of the board was designed to break the airflow and reduce air resistance. This increased speed, but at the same time, the control requirements of the hoverboard were much higher. Zani didn't unfurl his hoverboard. Instead, he took off his jacket and jumped down. After falling a certain distance, a pair of featherless, bat-like wings suddenly unfurled from his back, making him look like a ghost in the night. Only Ling Shi and Goryo remained on the roof, watching the development below. Chapter 233. In this part of the city, many people had been hypnotized. The people walking on the streets, the people sitting in the restaurants, the mobile stalls floating in the sky, all of them were gone. In addition to the hypnotic effect of Sentinel Spirit Shi, the planetary government also took action, sending some people who were still drifting away from their consciousness away from this area. Soon, there were no other people in the streets around the bar, only flashing lights. However, the planetary government had evacuated some innocent people, but they did not make a move against the main characters here, or rather, they pretended to be deaf and dumb. The Gen family and the Fuvig family had not come out to express their opinions, and they, as small fries, did not want to get involved. Some people in the military were also aware, but they maintained a wait-and-see attitude. The black leopard had the unique elegance of a feline. It was swift and arrogant, and its dark golden pupils reflected a frightening light in the night. Every step it took was like a noble taking a stroll in a grand ceremony, and it was pleasing to the eyes and heart. In comparison, Mao was much more comical. Perhaps it was because he had drunk too much alcohol, but he was a little shaky when he ran. When he slid down a beautiful arc on the side, he even slipped and slid like a child on a slide. Midway, due to his unstable center of gravity, he made a 180-degree turn, and his butt slid forward and landed first. The Black Panther regretted running. Why did he listen to this cat's provocation and run down? This kind of trash wants to fight one-on-one? Not to mention his size, just his unsteady steps alone could send him flying with a single paw. After landing, Mao slowly stood up, turned around and shook his fur. At this time, the Black Panther that was descending from the skyscraper was already close. With a large leap, its smooth fur revealed a beautiful streamline under the illumination of the lights, but after a bang, the elegance was gone. The Black Panther that was leaping towards Mao was sent flying. Ling Shi and Goryo, who were standing at the top of the skyscraper, raised their eyebrows when they saw this. A cat that could send Panther flying in a single move. It seemed like this was the first time they had seen such a cat. Not to mention cats, even the other exotic beasts of AF1 had not made Panther lose face like this. The Black Panther was originally going to trample the ugly, small, and stupid cat on the ground, but when he really touched it, he found that he was suddenly hit by a strong force. When he came back to his senses, he was already knocked into the air. He adjusted his center of gravity and landed on the ground. Moving his chin, he felt a burning pain, which proved that the blow just now was not an illusion. It was an oversight. The Black Panther re-examined the cat. At this moment, Huimao was squatting on the ground, looking at the Black Panther calmly. He flicked his ears and licked his claws, saying, "So weak!" The Black Panther roared, and its domineering roar spread out with a vibration wave. Some of the glass products in the nearby shops shattered with a bang. Huimao pulled back his ears, raised his head 45 degrees, opened his mouth, and howled. Meow. He didn't have the domineering aura of the Black Panther, but more of an inexplicable strangeness. The moment it heard the cat's meow, the Black Panther's fur stood on end. It didn't feel danger, but terror. It was an absurd and instinctive trembling. Following the cat's meow, a dark zone began to appear with the Black Panther at the center. The electrical circuits were affected, and the power supply system was completely paralyzed. A growing circle of darkness appeared in the colorful night view of the city. All the lighting equipment in the skyscrapers and bars were destroyed, and the place was completely dark. The people who were watching this area from space were shocked, but the display equipment was also starting to show interference. They couldn't see what was happening below them. The city was dark, but that didn't mean that the battle had stopped. The people who came down on hoverboards quickly arrived in front of Silin and the others. Zani was about to land on the rooftop of the bar when he suddenly appeared 3 steps away from Dewey. He spread his wings wide and said, "My apologies, beautiful lady, but you can't interfere with the battle over there. This is my territory." Belle and Zhen Xingming were both fighting, so she couldn't back down. She was also one of the vanguards when she was in school. A metal rod appeared in Dewey's hand. It split open in the middle and folded in reverse to reveal its true appearance. It was a custom-made butterfly knife. At the same time, Biyao stood in front of Belle, Inafu in front of Zhen Xingming, and Silin in front of Puno. Biyao's forte was speed, and he was even faster than Zani's move just now. Belle knew this, so he had to catch Biyao's movements as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would be forced into a passive position. Zhen Xingming stared at the seemingly delicate girl in front of him. He knew very well that this was just a facade, and that Inafu was actually a strength type just like Puno. As for that long braid behind her head, one should never think that it was Inafu's blind spot. In reality, dozens of people had died to that braid. As for Puno, he wasn't just strong, his movements weren't as clumsy as they looked. His muscular body was flexible, and even his punches were agile without losing any of their power. His punches weren't flashy at all, and every one of them carried the determination to subdue the enemy in one hit. The Zhen family and the Fuvig family were secretly anxious, but they didn't show up to interfere. Why? Just now, Tuo Sen had communicated with them and conveyed Griffin's message. AF-1 and AF-2's targets weren't Zhen Xingming and Belle's group, so they weren't going to kill them. They were only going to stop them. In fact, the situation was very clear. Compared to Zani, Biyao, and Inafu, Puno's attacks were much fiercer. The other 3 were mostly defending. The people protecting Zhen Xingming and Belle relaxed a little when they saw this, but they still paid attention to their master's movements at all times just in case. Bang! Puno's punch missed, but a huge hole appeared in the wall half a meter away from his fist. It was a hole created by the aftershock of his punch. Darvi, who was fighting Zani, felt her face twitch. The destruction had finally begun. Zani even had the leisure to look at the other side. He said to Darvi, "This is unavoidable. Think about it. Think about it, my ass. I'm going to get the repair fees this time." Darvi swung her butterfly knife at Zani as if she was venting her anger. Zani curled his lips and nimbly dodged the attack. Silin dodged the punch head-on, lowered his body, turned his feet inwards, and swung his left arm inwards. They were both simple punches, but Silin had the advantage in speed. It wasn't too difficult for Silin to deal with Puno's rainstorm of punches. In fact, he was able to counter quite a few of his punches. Puno wasn't feeling good after taking a few of Silin's punches, but his attacks didn't slow down at all. It was as if he couldn't feel any pain at all. Silin had also noticed Puno's abnormality, because every punch he threw was enough to break a few bones in Puno's ears. However, these bones that should have been broken only let out a cracking sound, and then there was nothing else. It was as if they had never been broken, and did not affect Puno at all. Rapid recovery? No, definitely not. This was different from Guadai Shirsi's short-term recovery. Puno's bones should have been broken, but they didn't break apart after they broke. It was like a broken stick sticking close to the fracture. The cracks were still there, but it didn't look like they were broken. However, even if it didn't look like it was broken, it shouldn't be as unaffected as Puno was. No, it was still affected. The muscle activity at the broken bones was 0.001 seconds slower than before. It was still due to his body's peculiarity. Puno still needed to repair his bones after this. As for the 0.001 seconds Puno was slower, Silen seized this momentary difference and gave Puno a few more punches. Biao grinned at Belle and sent a lightning-fast kick towards Belle's abdomen. The people in the shadows watched their prince roll on the ground while holding his stomach. They hesitated for a moment but didn't show up in the end. They were all experts, so they could tell that the kick had only temporarily incapacitated Belle and didn't cause any life-threatening injuries. However, if they showed up, they would probably be called over by Belle to fight against AF1 and AF2. Therefore, when they thought of what Tua Sun had said before, they decided not to show themselves for now. The Fire Eagle King's order was to ensure Belle's safety anyway. As long as Belle's life wasn't in danger, the Fire Eagle King was willing to let Belle suffer a little. After kicking Belle, Biao went over to help Puno against Silen. Since Puno couldn't keep up with Silen's speed, Biao would do it. One was good at speed, the other was good at strength, and the two worked well together. This undoubtedly put a lot of pressure on Silen. Biao specifically took advantage of the gaps between Silen and Puno to interfere with Silen from tricky angles. It was often said that two fists were no match for four hands, but strangely enough, Silen wasn't hurt by Biao or Puno even though he didn't retaliate as much against Puno as Biao. Biao and Puno grew more and more apprehensive as they fought. Before, they thought Silen was just a little faster, but now that Biao was moving faster and faster, Silen seemed to be working with him to increase his speed. The overlapping shadows of fists, palms, and kicks, along with the darkness of the night, made it harder and harder for them to catch up. All they could hear was the sound of collisions and the occasional sound of walls being smashed through. Bang! Biao was kicked out by Silen in a moment of carelessness, and he smashed into the surrounding walls. The wall behind him shattered with a resounding sound, but the good thing was that Biao managed to grab onto a corner of the shattered wall when the wall shattered, flipped himself over and rolled a few times on the ground. Rubbing his stomach, Biao turned around to see Belle sitting on the ground with a grin on his face. Belle's eyes seemed to be saying, "Retribution has come, kid." The corner of Biao's eye twitched as he looked in the direction of the skyscraper. He didn't ask Anaf and Zani to help. After what had happened just now, Biao also understood that Silen's speed was too great. Even if Anaf and Zani went up, they would probably be the same as him in no time. So he looked at Goryo, who was standing on the roof of the skyscraper. Without the lights, the building was completely dark. On the roof, Ling Shi looked at Biao, who had been kicked out of the fighting circle, and said, "You can indeed make your move." Goryo chuckled and took out a box. Inside the box were a few parts and a few strangely shaped bullets. As Goryo moved his fingers, the parts were assembled one by one, and soon, a gun was assembled in Goryo's hands. It looked very strange. According to the parts, this gun used bullets, but unlike other guns, this gun's barrel was very short, so short that it looked a little deformed. Goryo picked out a bullet from the box. There were a few holes on the bullet and some strange whorls on it. After loading it, the bullet could still be seen at the mouth of the barrel. After loading it, Goryo put on his glasses. Through the glasses, he could see what was happening below, find the target, and use the data on his eyes to calculate and deduce in his mind. He pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot was very soft. The moment the muzzle locked onto him, Sillin sensed it. Taking advantage of Puno's punch, Sillin quickly retreated. But the bullet grazed Sillin's shoulder and shot into the crystal-like floor. A spider web of cracks instantly appeared on the floor. Puno didn't restrain himself just because someone was shooting at him. Instead, he attacked even more fiercely, as if he was going to fight to the death. Puno knew Goryo too well and believed in Goryo's ability. Goryo wouldn't hurt him, and Goryo's gun would never accidentally hurt him. The first shot was just a test to test Sillin's reaction. There was still the second and third shot. Each shot would be different and more difficult to dodge. What Puno needed to do now was to try his best to interfere with Sillin and affect Sillin's judgment so that he couldn't pose a threat to Goryo, who was shooting over there. Goryo's first shot was aimed at Sillin's right shoulder, but Sillin dodged it. The bullet grazed the clothes on his right shoulder, and the skin on his right shoulder could still feel the burn caused by the friction between the bullet and the air as it flew at high speed. This kind of bullet seemed to burn the air in its trajectory. There were burn marks on Sillin's shoulder, but this wound wasn't a straight line. Instead, it was curved, an irregular arc. Just now, Sillin felt that something was wrong. Through his keen hearing and accurate judgment and calculation ability, Sillin understood that the bullet's trajectory was not a straight line, but an arc. However, this arc was different from an arc design. Instead, it was a change in trajectory caused by the shape of the bullet itself during its flight. In other words, as long as the bullet was still flying in the air, its trajectory would change. It was reasonable to say that it was difficult to control the accuracy of such a change in trajectory. However, for some people, it was a big killer weapon. Whether it was a straight shot or an arc design, as long as one understood and had the ability, they would be able to make the most timely and accurate dodging. However, this kind of bullet that was constantly changing its trajectory made it impossible for the target to judge which direction to dodge to at that moment. Of course, the person who dared to use this kind of bullet must also be someone with extraordinary calculation ability. He could calculate the bullet's trajectory based on the environmental conditions at the time, the distance from the target, the changes in air pressure, temperature, and airflow, etc. In their eyes, the target was just moving in different calculated trajectories. When the time was right, the shooter would shoot. Therefore, Sillin also had to face a person with extraordinary calculation ability. While dealing with Puno's attack, Sillin paid attention to the person on the roof. His heart skipped a beat. Sillin knew that the second shot was coming. Compared with the first shot, the trajectory of this bullet had clearly changed again. It was faster than the previous one, but the changes in the trajectory were also more complicated. But the bullet passed through the gap between Sillin's fingers and hit the ground. If Sillin had still clenched his fist just now, his entire fist would probably have been crippled. However, at that moment, Sillin opened his palm and the bullet passed through the gap between the middle and ring fingers of his left hand. Chapter 234. Ignoring the burn on his finger, Sillin avoided Puno's elbow strike and punched the side of Puno's waist. He succeeded in one hit, but Sillin did not take the opportunity to launch a combo. Instead, he leaped back, and the third bullet was about to arrive. The second bullet was obviously more difficult to grasp than the first one, and one could imagine how difficult the third one would be. Sillin needed time to analyze the third bullet. Even if it was only a 10,000th of a second more, it would increase the success rate of the analysis. Ling Shi, who was standing on the roof, looked at Sillin. She did not expect Goryo's second bullet to miss, and what she did not expect even more was that Sillin's finger was only slightly burned. It was just an instantaneous burn from the bullet's high temperature. How was that possible? According to Ling Shi's understanding of the bullet used by Goryo, this bullet did not only bring about instantaneous high temperature, but also a powerful airflow compression impact. Purgatory Thunder Snake was the name of this bullet. After the bullet was fired, It had the speed of lightning and the instantaneous change of trajectory of lightning. It was also like a snake biting its prey. The snake would not blink, and it would not give the target even a blink of an eye to escape. Trajectory change, instantaneous high temperature, and high pressure impact. It was not easy to dodge, and the secondary destructive force was not something that ordinary people could withstand. Therefore, even if it passed through the gaps between Silen's fingers, it should not only bring about a burn to Silen. According to Ling Shi's estimation, even if it did not break his fingers, a piece of flesh would be cut off by the airflow. But that was not the case. It seemed that Silen's physical strength was not inferior to Puno's. While Ling Shi was analyzing Silen, Goryo fired his third bullet. When this bullet was fired, the muzzle was not aimed at Silen, but it was indeed locked onto Silen. Silen could clearly feel it. In fact, Goryo did not think that he would use this bullet on Silen here. After the second shot, Goryo replaced the bullet he had originally planned and used this one. Because if he had used the bullet he had originally planned, there was a 60% chance that it would have missed. At most, it would have given Silen another burn wound. Goryo was very confident in this bullet. Even Teacher Griffin and the others wouldn't be able to dodge it. Moreover, this bullet's penetrative ability was quite strong. It could penetrate an entire spaceship. The special material and the special shooting made Goryo very confident in this bullet. This was the true Purgatory Thunder Snake. The first two Purgatory Thunder Snake bullets could only be called Thunder Snakes, but this one was a Purgatory Thunder Snake bullet. If Griffin knew that Goryo had used a Purgatory Thunder Snake on Silen, he wondered if she would flip out. When the Purgatory Thunder Snakes appeared, they would either die or be heavily injured. At least Griffin didn't intend to seriously injure Silen. Time to see blood, Gaul thought faintly. The bullet streaked across the distance between the two buildings at high speed, changing its trajectory and shooting at Silen. At the same time, Puno also attacked Silen again. Unavoidable, unavoidable. Golder looked down with a smile. Clang. The sparks produced by the friction of metal were particularly conspicuous in the dark, like a snake colliding with a hard shield at high speed. Goryo's smile froze. Puno's attack was also forcibly stopped. That clang had already caused the others to stop and pay attention to Selene's side. The slender blade wasn't conspicuous in the dark. Without the illumination of the lights, the dim starlight plated the blade with a layer of cold light, bringing an indelible shock to those who saw this scene. At that moment it was like a sharp claw had suddenly reached out from the void and blocked the Purgatory Thunder Snake bullet. The blade. It was Osculo's blade. It had been baptized by the blood of countless people and had accompanied a star-level hunter on countless battlefields. It was this blade that seemed to make the surrounding temperature suddenly drop to a freezing point. Bell was originally prepared to swear and accuse these people of using guns, but he held back all of his words. A murderous aura that made one's hair stand on end. Puno seemed to hear the wailing of countless wronged souls. In theory, the bullet had been aimed at Silen's right shoulder, but it had been blocked by the blade on its way over. Holding his blade, Silen glanced at Puno, whose entire body was tensed and stopped a meter away from the horizontal blade. Suddenly, the shadow of his hand flashed, and the blade's position had already changed. He held it upside down and placed it beside him. Clang! Sparks flew. The fourth shot. Puno's throat was dry and he swallowed a few times. 4 shots. Goryo hadn't even hit a single target. After knowing Goryo for so many years and working together for so long, this was the first time he had seen Goryo's 4 shots fail. Zani's night vision was the best among them. He could clearly see the blade in Silen's hand. There were no marks on the blade, and it had blocked 2 shots. The sparks from the friction of metal didn't come from this blade at all, but from the so-called Purgatory Thunder Snake that could pierce through a spacecraft. After the 4th shot, Goryo put away the gun, dismantled it, and put it back in the box. He understood very well that there was no need for Silen to shoot again. The Purgatory Thunder Snake wasn't invincible. To be able to calculate the trajectory of the Purgatory Thunder Snake to such an accurate degree was indeed admirable. Goryo was able to predict the trajectory of the bullet because of his understanding of the Purgatory Thunder Snake. But what about Silin? Silin had deduced the bullet's shape and structure based on the bullet's initial flight trajectory, and then deduced the subsequent trajectory changes. If it was a calculation problem in a class, then there were countless people in AF1 who could solve it. However, this was an actual battle, and there was only a short moment left for people to think. What was this person's brain made of? Was it a human computer? Goryo had always thought that his brain was good, and his rapid calculation ability was strong, but compared to Silin, it was really not up to standard. After putting away the box, Goryo made a helpless gesture toward Lingxi. This guy is too strong. No wonder Teacher Griffin sees him in a different light. Seeing that Goryo had put away his knife, Puno also did the same. He pressed a few parts of his body that had been hit by Silin. This time, his injuries seemed to be a bit more serious. As Puno rubbed his wounds, the cracked bones inside his body slowly began to heal. Bell and Jen Xingming relaxed when they saw that these people were showing signs of stopping. However, when they saw a badge accidentally fall out of Puno's wound while he was rubbing it, they became nervous again. Puno hurriedly picked up the badge, blew on it, and wiped it. Then, he smiled innocently at everyone and put it away like it was a treasure. Zani Biyao and the others didn't react much to Puno's badge. They had one of their own, and it was the capital of their arrogance. Even if they didn't have a military rank, the soldiers would still treat them with respect. Through the night vision on her cornea, Davi also saw the pattern on the badge. The hand holding the butterfly knife trembled a little. Wing. Wing was a special department of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The emblem of Wing was a pair of wings. At the center of the emblem was the national emblem of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. There was a pair of wings on each side of the emblem. One wing had the emblem of the Imperial Guard, and the other had the emblem of the Imperial Guard. Although Wing's emblem had the emblem of the two great armies of the Empire, they were independent of the two great armies. Wing had a lot of authority, and could accept orders directly from the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor. In other words, the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor was their ultimate leader. They were also the only department that the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor had granted them the right to kill nobles directly. There were plenty of nobles who had broken the laws of the Empire and been beaten by Wing, and many of them had been killed. That was why the nobles' first reaction when they saw Wing was to feel guilty. Who didn't have a pile of shit on their butt? In Bell and Jen Xingming's eyes, these people were just AF1 and AF2 students. At most, they would feel a little uncomfortable, but they didn't think that they would cause too much trouble. But now, they weren't so sure anymore. Who knew what kind of orders these people had received? What if they were accidentally injured or killed in the end? It wasn't that Bell and Jen Xingming were cowards. As direct descendants of the royal family, they shouldn't be so afraid of Wing's people. But Bell and Jen Xingming had never been obedient since they were young. They had done what they should and shouldn't have done. It would have been fine if their father was here to support them, but without the old man's support, they were clearly lacking in authority. When did Wing recruit these bastards? Why hadn't they heard anything at all? Bell and Jen Xingming couldn't be blamed for not knowing. If they were still in the imperial capital, they would have found out with a little investigation. But the problem was that they had left the imperial capital for a while now, so they didn't know what was going on in AF1 and AF2. Zani was very cocky. The wings on his back were flapping loudly to show off his existence. Bell and Jen Xingming, the two princes of the royal family, were intimidated by him. Ahem, Puno, put your badge away. Of course, it was an accident. Puno had no intention of showing off. He put away his badge and started massaging his wound again. Zani glanced at the guarded Bell and the others and was about to show off again when he noticed Silin's gaze. He turned to look at Silin. What are you looking at, kid? I know I'm handsome, but you've never seen a man with wings before, have you? It can't be helped. Talent always attracts jealousy. Biao and Anaf were used to Zani's behavior a long time ago. They didn't even bother to roll their eyes at Silen. Silen, was it? Our boss has a message for you. Silen moved before Biao could finish his sentence. Although Puno was rubbing the wounds on his body, he was also paying attention to Silen's movements at all times. At this time, he saw that Silen had suddenly moved, and he even had the momentum to openly swing his blade. Moreover, the target of the swing was none other than the smug Zani. Puno instantly pushed himself to the limit and smashed a large hole in the ground with his legs. He sprinted towards Silen. Biao also kicked at Silen at top speed. Judging from the group situation, Silen was the closest to Punori, and Biao was slightly further away. However, neither of them could compare to Silen's distance to Zani's. Silen was obviously the furthest away, but he was able to dodge Puno's fist, Biao's kick, parry Anaf's fist, and stab Zani in the stomach. Zani was still thinking about how to show off in front of these two famous members of the royal family, but he suddenly felt a strong sense of danger. But before he could react, he felt a chill in his abdomen, and a huge chill swept through his entire body. Zani regretted his carelessness. He had failed miserably in an easy task. For a moment, Zani felt that he had experienced the feeling of death. Ling Shi and Goryo, who were standing on top of a tall building, didn't expect Silen to be so daring either. Belle, the Gen family, and the Fuvig family members who were watching from the shadows felt like their hair was about to explode when they saw this scene. Belle and Gen Xingming really wanted to knock themselves out on the ground. Stabbing a member of Wing? Other than those who didn't care about their lives, only their superiors would listen to them. But Silen didn't look like someone who didn't care about his life, and he definitely wasn't a member of Wing. Why would he stab Zani? Although Zani's mouth was as big as Bart's, he couldn't just stab Zani directly. Belle looked at Gen Xingming. It's over. Silen definitely doesn't know about Wing, or he wouldn't dare stab Zani. What do we do? What do we do? Motherfucker bastard. Puno's body swelled and doubled in size. Anaf and Biao were different from before as well. They looked like they were ready to fight to the death. Ling Shi and Goryo flew down on a fan-shaped flying board. Goryo was holding two guns in his hands, two short-barreled guns similar to the ones from before. Wait! Ling Shi stopped them. Zani's fine. Silen put away his blade. It still wasn't stained with a single drop of blood. He frowned at Zani. Silen was far more sensitive to those things than anyone else present. In fact, he was even more sensitive than Zani himself. But he drew his knife at Zani. This is unforgivable. Puno and Biao looked like they were about to stop. Stop! Zani shouted. Puno and Biao finally stopped attacking when they heard Zani's words. They looked at Zani in confusion, not understanding why he was doing this. Zani took a deep breath with some difficulty and exhaled slowly. It took him quite a bit of effort to recover from the shock just now, and he waved his hand at the healing potion Anaf passed to him to indicate that he didn't need it. Bell had covered his face with his hands when he saw that the battle was about to begin, but his eyes were still peeking through the gaps between his fingers. At first, he was complaining that the people hiding in the shadows didn't come out to help, but when he saw that things weren't going the way he expected, he moved his hands away and openly observed the situation. Under everyone's confused gazes, Zani raised his hand and revealed 5 fingernails that were even longer than his fingers. Then, Zani put his hand into the wound that Silen had just stabbed him. Zani used his long fingernails to dig into the wound until they completely disappeared. Bell and Gen Xingming subconsciously touched their abdomens and shivered when they saw this. It must be very painful. When Zani's fingernails reappeared, they were holding a black object about the size of a quail egg. An insect? Zani twisted his fingers and crushed the object into pieces when he saw it. Then, he raised his head and let out a long scream that didn't sound like a human's. Following this sharp scream, Zani's originally sturdy body quickly became thin, but his arms were stretched out. Pop, pop. 2 more pairs of wings unfurled behind Zani's back, each longer than the last. 2 long, sharp teeth protruded out of his mouth. His silhouette under the hazy starlight looked quite sinister at first glance, like a demon from a fairy tale. Scylla could feel that Zani had become lighter. No, his bones had become lighter. They were probably hollow bones that allowed him to move faster in the air. This was the real Zani. In comparison, the previous Zani looked like he was playing with a child. Zani let out another scream after he became like this. This time, he didn't change as much as before, but there were some obvious protrusions moving around his body. However, these protrusions moved from Zani's body to the 3 pairs of wings as if they were threatened. When all the protrusions had moved to the 3 pairs of wings, Zani let out a third scream. The 3 pairs of wings shook violently, and the skin around the protrusions broke open, shaking out the things inside. Pop, pop. The shaking of the wings caused something similar to the black object that Zani had crushed to fall to the ground. Insects? Could it be? Biao exclaimed in surprise. He took out a knife and poked one up for a closer look. These little insects that had fallen to the ground were already close to death because of Zani. They all died in a short while. After shaking out all the insects in his body, Zani returned to his original appearance. This time, he retracted all his wings. Zani panted as he cursed, "Fuck, I miscalculated. I've failed so many times." He'd flipped a few times already. These things were definitely caused by the previous mission. Seeing Zani like this, Puno and the others hurriedly checked themselves. Although they couldn't find any insects in their bodies, they were still a bit worried. After seeing Zani's condition, they felt some lingering fear. Yinav took out a bag and collected the insects, preparing to take them back for identification. Parasites? Lingxi looked at the dead insects on the ground, then turned to Scylla. Now, everyone understood that Scylla's previous stab had killed one of the parasites in Zani's abdomen, but how did Scylla know that Zani had these things in his body? And how did he stab it so accurately? How did you know that there were parasites in Zani's body? Lingxi asked. Scylla looked at them. Do you guys always speak in such a high and mighty tone? Scylla saying that he didn't feel anything about being attacked for no reason was pure nonsense. Lingxi paused and her tone softened. We're very sorry, but we won't apologize for what happened before. We were just following orders. Still, we thank you for what you did to Zani. Hey you Scylla, right? Thanks. Zani had expended too much energy just now, so he sat down on the ground and said to Scylla, "No need to thank me. Even if I didn't use my blade, you would have been able to endure it. It was just that it would have been terrible." Everyone knew this. Biao was about to say something when Lingxi stopped him. She took out a card and handed it to Scylla. "This is what our superior, Teacher Griffin, asked us to give you. As for how you treat it in the future, we won't interfere." Scylla took the card and looked at it, but he didn't understand what it was. Belle and Zhen Xingming had grown bolder by now and moved closer to take a look. Holy shit! You people from AF1 have gone too far. I've never seen people poach people like this. Belle's arrogance returned as he pointed at Lingxi and the others. AF1's recommendation card. Zhen Xingming looked left and right before patting Scylla's shoulder. Brother, you're in luck. Someone recommended you to AF1. Scylla finally understood the card's use. This meant that he would be able to enter AF1 if he brought this card with him during the next recruitment. Zhen Xingming continued, "You don't know yet, do you, Scylla? The people in AF1 can only enter through recommendation." That bastard Tuo Sen. Belle interrupted Zhen Xingming with a loud roar. It must have been that bastard Tuo Sen who leaked the information, that piece of trash. I knew he wasn't reliable. Okay, we have to go too. As for this matter, if you have any questions, you can ask Teacher Griffin directly, said Lingxi. They had done what Griffin wanted them to do, and they still had a mission to complete. They couldn't stay here for too long. Plus, they had to investigate the parasites and seal off the place first. Funo and the others suddenly felt that something was wrong when Ling Shi said they were leaving. It was as if one of them was missing. While they were thinking, they heard a noise coming from the edge of the wall. 2 cat paws rested on the edge of the wall before a cat's head popped out. The cat seemed to be biting something in its mouth. Hui Mao looked very spirited and unharmed. It was only after they jumped up that they realized that Hui Mao was biting the Black Panther's tail. He had dragged the Black Panther up by its tail. It looked like he had done it effortlessly. The surroundings lit up again. The flickering lampposts and the surrounding projections illuminated the place. However, it probably wouldn't be as noisy as it used to be tonight because the planetary government had already sent people to evacuate the hypnotized people here. As for the Black Panther that Hui Mao had dragged up, it looked very weak. Its body was obviously swollen, and it lay there limply. It raised its eyelids to look at Ling Shi and the others before hugging its head with its paws. It wanted nothing more than to find a hole to hide in. Shameful, too shameful. He actually lost to an ugly cat. After Hui Mao jumped up, he looked at the people around him and tossed the Black Panther on the ground. He then walked up to Dewey as if there was no one else around. "Do you have any more alcohol? I'm thirsty." Belle really wanted to worship it. This cat was just too amazing. Not only did it beat the Black Panther into this state, but it could also drink so much. Not only was it so good at drinking, it even ignored the people from Wing. As expected, like pet, like master. Dewey looked at the people around her and took a step back, then another. Seeing that there was no reaction, she left to look for alcohol for Hui Mao. Hui Mao saw that Dewey had gone to look for alcohol, so he turned around and ran to Silen. He climbed up to Silen's shoulder with practiced ease. "What's that in your hand?" The invitation card attached. Silen handed the card to Hui Mao for him to take a closer look. "Attached? Is it the first advanced education school of the RES that Belle mentioned?" "Yes." Hui Mao looked at the card, then at the people around the Black Panther, who were feeding it medicine and inspecting it. "Just like that panther?" "Indeed." "No." Hui Mao wagged his tail confidently. "Too weak. What a waste of time. The people around him. This cat was too cocky." Hui Mao pushed the card away with his paw and yawned, looking like he didn't want to talk to them anymore. Zani couldn't stand it anymore. "You can't say that. We've all been conserving our strength." The Black Panther raised its paws and covered its ears. It had used its full strength, but it was suppressed before it could show its power. Seeing the Black Panther like this, Ling Shi called out to Zani. "Let's go. We still have a mission." Puno followed Ling Shi and the others for a few steps before running back to stand in front of Silen. "I really don't have that thing on me?" Without waiting for Silen to speak, Hui Mao said without opening his eyes, "Are you talking about the bug?" "No." Puno looked at Hui Mao, then at Silen. It was only when he saw Silen nod that he happily caught up to Ling Shi and the others. After Ling Shi and the others had left, Hui Mao urged Silen to find a place to eat. "Hey, wait for me!" Belle chased after him while cursing into his communicator. "Why didn't you say this earlier? What's the point? I'm not going back. I don't want to listen to you." After ending the call, Belle turned around and called out to Zhen Xingming, who was still standing in place. "Let's go." "Got it." Zhen Xingming answered, but he was a little confused as he watched Silen's back. Zhen Xingming had felt a very familiar feeling when Silen blocked the bullet with his blade, and it was the same feeling when Silen put his blade away. It was very strange. Silen was a mystery. If he was a normal person and didn't live a good life, then why would he have a subspace container? Although subspace technology was developing very quickly in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, most people who owned subspace containers were nobles and wealthy merchants. Why would Silen own a subspace container with his circumstances? Moreover, Silen's blade wasn't ordinary either. Could he be an illegitimate child of some family? The more Zhen Xingming thought about it, the more likely it seemed. On the other side, Ling Shi and the others were analyzing Silen after they had boarded the spaceplane and left the planet. There's no doubt that Silen is much stronger than his peers. Even some of the people from AF1 and AF2 might not be able to beat him in a head-on fight, Biao said. But why hasn't anyone discovered him yet? Teacher Griffin had a group of people who were specifically responsible for finding people like them. Zani crossed his legs. Say, who do you think would win if White Knight and Silen were to fight? Of course it would be White Knight. It's not like you don't know how strong White Knight is, Inafu said affirmatively. Zani shook his finger. Don't blindly worship someone. You need to analyze objectively. Goryo didn't say anything. He didn't know who would win either. Seeing Zani and Inafu arguing, Biao asked Ling Shi, "What do you think, Ling Shi? You know your brother better than we do, don't you?" White Knight was Ling Shi's older brother. They were discovered and brought to AF1 together. Ling Shi shook her head. Silen is a very well-hidden person. No one said anything for a while. Puno scratched his head and didn't know what to say. In order to change the topic, he kicked the black panther that was playing dead next to him. Panther, is that cat really that strong? Panther looked pained. I doubt it's a cat. I can't scratch its skin at all. Also, Panther panted heavily. Is that the strength of a cat? Not even King Kong is as strong as it. King Kong was a 10-meter tall gorilla, baby gorilla. It was still in its infancy. Chapter 235. Belle and Zhen Xingming didn't care how Ling Shi and the others discussed the matter after they left. They finally relaxed after the tension had passed, and their playboy demeanor quickly returned. The planetary government continued to play dumb as if nothing had happened. In reality, they did want to selectively lose their memories. After all, they couldn't afford to offend either Wing or the princes of the two royal families, so they might as well forget about them. Dewey had already ordered her people to repair the damaged parts of the bar. Belle and Zhen Xingming were the ones who paid for it, so the two princes didn't mind the small amount of money. Will you join AF1, Silen? Belle and Zhen Xingming looked at Silen. They were very curious about this. Silen shook his head. I don't know. Let's see how it goes. There were too many variables at the moment, and he wasn't familiar with this place yet. Jenya's incident also puzzled him. It wasn't hard to bring Jenya back to the Zhen family, but what did Jenya mean when he said that he could only go home when his ring reacts? If you can make it through, you will definitely learn a lot of things after joining AF1. You should know that AF1's teachers are all famous people of the Empire. Other than the people from the RES, there are also famous generals of the Empire, some retired generals and old politicians. Zhen Xingming really hoped that Silen could join AF1. Belle and Zhen Xingming felt awkward every time they talked about AF1, but they had always admired them from the bottom of their hearts. There were very few royals who could join AF1, and those who did were all the focus of the royal family's training. They were people who had been carefully taken care of by generations of the royal family. Even the two sons of the current king couldn't compare to their influence in the royal family. Unfortunately, Belle and Zhen Xingming didn't have the talent or the ability to endure the hardship. If Silen went to AF1, he could brag a little. I have a good friend in AF1 too. Belle didn't say anything. He had a feeling that Silen would either be lured into joining the army, or someone else would take advantage of the situation and steal him away. If I go in now, the people of my age should be much younger than me, right? After all, as you said, the people there are all geniuses, Silen said. Zhen Xingming waved a hand and explained, that's not necessarily the case. The age range inside AF1 is too broad, and that place doesn't care about age at all. It doesn't even care about race. Didn't you see how cocky that black leopard was? Moreover, if you were to enter, you might not necessarily start from the very beginning. AF1 didn't have a fixed grade level. They would arrange the curriculum based on the admission test. Most of the time, the attached school doesn't look like a school, but more like a base to cultivate special talents. In that case, Silen did have some sectors. If he could go there and learn new knowledge, he would definitely benefit greatly. Silen thinks for a moment, then asked, "What's up with the wings you mentioned before?" Bell and Jen Xingming explained Wing's situation to Silen in detail so that Silen would pay more attention to anyone who saw Wing in the future. Bell and Jen Xingming's fathers weren't afraid of Wing, but they were. It couldn't be helped. They had done too many shameful things, so they couldn't help but feel guilty whenever they saw them. The reason Wing was founded was because of the extravagance of the nobles. Wing was the eyes and ears of the mist Bodhisattva Emperor. When Wing was around, the nobles were a lot more restrained. It was to supervise the nobles. Therefore, even though the nobles had special privileges, they couldn't go too far. It would be terrible if they were caught. Alright, let's change the topic. My stomach hurts when I talk about this, Bell said while shaking off the cold air around him. Alright, I do have something to tell you. Big bro bought a new car. Jen Xingming looked spirited as he slapped the table and boasted, "That's Whirlwind's new tripod super flying car series. There are only 5 of them out now, and this Prince's Ride is one of them." Whirlwind was a famous brand among flying cars. It was one of the most unique super flying car manufacturers in the empire. It was famous for its low-key luxury and belonged to the Sizer family. It was one of the top families among the tripod flying cars, and many of its models could be transformed, restrained, and flashy. It was loved by the nobles and was the dream of the flying car race. Bell said sourly while listening to Jen Xingming's drawn-out boasting, "What's the point of just talking? Bring it out and let us see what Whirlwind's latest super flying car model looks like." Bell could have gotten his hands on one if he didn't want to experience life. The problem was that he had already missed the opportunity. Dewey shot a sideways glance at the smug Jen Xingming and shook her head. What a spendthrift. Silen himself wanted to see what the legendary super flying car looked like. However, a strange expression appeared on Silen and Bell's faces when they saw the car that made Jen Xingming's tail stick up in the air. It was because it was one of the models that Fleeka and the others had been researching. Bell's sour mood immediately brightened up. His grin was so wide that it almost reached his ears. What was I thinking? I didn't know it was something we could play with. It was Bell's turn to be smug this time. You're just jealous. Why the hell would you play with a new car? Jen Xingming said with a "I knew you were lying" expression. TSK, why would I lie to you? Bell jumped into the car with practiced ease and fiddled with a series of settings on the control panel. The flying car changed its form according to the settings, and Bell explained to Jen Xingming while driving. He was able to explain in detail many of the settings that Jen Xingming didn't have time to figure out yet. Fuck, how did you know? Jen Xingming grabbed Bell's neck and shook it hard. Bell kicked Jen Xingming away and rubbed his neck. Then, he raised his chin proudly and said, "I was there when that fatty Fleeka was designing the flying car. Come to think of it, I even had a hand in the creation of this car. Silen, I think that fatty should give each of us a car when we run into him." Silen shot a glance at Bell when he heard this, but he didn't say anything. Out of respect, he didn't tear down Bell's act. Under Jen Xingming's pressure, Bell explained the whole story briefly. However, he made sure to beautify himself a little and reduce Silen's presence by a lot. He had to prevent the Jen family from poaching Silen. Jen Xingming rubbed his chin and looked at Silen. "When are you guys going back? I'll go with you and see where this car came from." "Let's go tomorrow." Bell had no objections to Silen's decision. He could do anything he wanted right now, but he didn't want to go back to school. Bell was even more reluctant to return to the imperial capital now that Jen Xingming had joined them. The next day, the trio left Old Man Chang's planet on Bell's flying car. Silen bought some things for Old Man Chang's triplets, and a high-end electronic board and microcomputer for Chang Xiao. Jen Xingming and Bell bought a lot of things as well when they saw Silen, especially children's toys. It was easy to win people's hearts and make a good impression on them. Dewey even gave Hui Mao a dozen or so bottles of alcohol and a huge bag of fish biscuits before they left. Hui Mao was so happy that he was in high spirits even when he returned to the planet. They took a spaceplane that was a little more inconspicuous. The main reason was that there was a warehouse on the spaceplane that made it convenient to store Zhen Xingming's flying car. Inside the shop, Old Man Chang was calculating the income from the parts he had sold over the past few days. This place was a lot more relaxed than the maintenance street outside the city. The living standards of the people in the city were higher, and the prices of the things sold were much higher as well. All in all, the family's living conditions were better, and they were a lot more relaxed. The knot in Old Man Chang's heart had been removed after Chang Xiaowu's illness was cured. The triplets were helping to repack the parts, but they would grab a handful of biscuits every once in a while. It looked like the three of them had grown a lot fatter. Just as Old Man Chang was calculating how much goods he should buy, a commotion suddenly broke out at the entrance. A flying car had stopped in front of the shop. Although the flying car didn't look flashy, it was actually very steady. It didn't stand out even among the other cars, and it gave off a very comfortable feeling. It wasn't eye-catching at all, but it was enough to catch the attention of anyone who saw it. What caused the commotion, however, was the brand at the front of the car. Old Man Chang had once dreamed of driving a car of this brand when he was younger. Who in their line of work wouldn't like a car of this brand? Whirlwind was a very high-end brand. Although this was the city, the center of the planet's wealth, it was extremely rare to see someone driving a whirlwind. Old Man Chang had seen one once when he was younger, but that was all. He hadn't seen it again after that. He didn't expect to see one today. The car door opened and a person walked out. He looked quite young and handsome. Moreover, he walked straight into the shop. Unlike the arrogance of some aristocratic children, this person looked very easygoing, and the smile on his face was very friendly, giving people a good impression of him at first glance. However, from the way he dressed and behaved, Old Man Chang could tell that this person was definitely an upper-class gentleman. Old Man Chang was a little nervous. He didn't know how to react when encountering such a person. After all, the gap between the two of them was too big. If the other party was an arrogant and despotic rich kid, Old Man Chang would know how to treat him. However, it just so happened that the person in front of him was like this, which put Old Man Chang in a difficult position. This kind of person was born to be looked up to. Even though he appeared to be easygoing, Old Man Chang still felt nervous. At the end of the day, Old Man Chang felt inferior and embarrassed to face such a person. Although there was a service robot, Old Man Chang still went up to greet him personally. "Excuse me, what do you need?" Old Man Chang asked carefully. The person smiled warmly. "Don't be nervous. I'm just looking around." "It's because you're looking around that I'm nervous," Old Man Chang thought to himself. As if reading Old Man Chang's mind, the person didn't say anything and looked at the parts on display. "I can see that you're very familiar with the structure of a flying car," the person said. "These parts are all arranged according to a specific construction order." At the mention of these things, Old Man Chang's nervousness lessened a little. As the person asked some maintenance questions, Old Man Chang's nervousness also slowly eased, and he answered seriously. Old Man Chang felt that this kind of person was quite good. Even if he didn't buy the parts, he couldn't be annoyed. Fortunately, the person sat on the chair that the service robot had brought over and chatted with Old Man Chang. He took a cup of water and moistened his eyes. Old Man Chang couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This was the upper class. Elegant, truly elegant. Sitting there, he looked like a painting. Even the act of drinking tea was so beautiful. While the two were talking, there was a whoosh and another flying car stopped in front of the shop. However, this car was much more flashy, and what made the surrounding people go crazy was that it was another whirlwind. What kind of dog *t luck did this shop owner have? He actually got 2 whirlwinds parked in front of the shop. However, some people began to suspect that this shop owner had some kind of relationship with some upper-class people. Ha, we're here. This is the shop? It's a little small, but it's not bad. Zhen Xingming made a cool pose after coming out to show off his presence. We're finally back. Huimao jumped into the shop and yelled, Come out and move the stuff, little ones. The triplets and Chang Xiaowu all came out when they heard Huimao's voice and surrounded him happily. The service robot helped to move the things Silin had bought into the shop. Little ones, I'm a friend of your big brother Silin, and I've brought you gifts. Zhen Xingming hurriedly took out the things he had bought from the car and piled them up on the ground. The triplets' eyes lit up, but they didn't go over to Silin directly. Instead, they looked at Silin and only went over to take the things after Silin nodded. Zhen Xingming was very confident in the gifts he had bought. This should leave a good impression on the little kid, right? Look at your manners. Belle walked over and said disdainfully to Zhen Xingming, Mind your image. Can't you see that there are still customers in the shop? What customer? Did I get in his way? Zhen Xingming's voice, which was originally quite powerful, suddenly dropped in pitch. The person who was chatting with old man Chang turned around elegantly and smiled at them. His smile was very friendly, but Belle and Zhen Xingming felt like they were suddenly thrown into a glacier. A chill rushed straight to their brains as they took 2 steps back in unison. From the looks of it, they wanted nothing more than to run away right now if possible. Zhen Xingming was filled with regret. Why did he decide to come with them on a whim? What's there to see? It's just a shop, isn't it? Damn, he ran into the person he didn't want to see even in his dreams after running all the way here. Belle was also regretting his decision. He really shouldn't have come. He really shouldn't have. The person smiled when he saw Belle and Zhen Xingming and said gently, Why are you 2 blocking the door? Whoosh. Belle and Zhen Xingming moved to the side as if they were running for their lives. Silin stared at the person sitting inside the shop. He looked about the same age as Ta Xin, and he looked pretty harmless. However, Silin had a feeling that he was the same type of person as Hunting Knife Gaydar. GGGG Teacher Guan. Belle and Zhen Xingming couldn't even speak properly. Guan Feng took a sip of the warm water in his cup and said, Don't worry, I'm not here to capture you. Belle and Zhen Xingming let out a small sigh of relief when they heard this. But only a small amount. The 2 who had been chattering non-stop on the way here didn't even dare let out a fart now. After handing everything over to the service robots, Silin brought the triplets and Chang Xiaowu upstairs into the house. Hey you 2, come over and help me. Silin shouted at Belle and Zhen Xingming from the stairs. Belle and Zhen Xingming shot Guan Feng a cautious glance. When they saw that the man was ignoring them, they ran upstairs like the wind. The 2 of them collapsed to the ground like they had lost all of their strength. It's over, it's over. Why did we run into him here? Zhen Xingming looked like he was about to cry. I don't know either. I wouldn't have come here even if you beat me to death if I did. Belle rubbed his face hard. After asking Huimao to take the 4 kids to play with their new toys, Silin brought over 2 cold drinks and passed them to the completely absent-minded duo. Drink this. It'll help you calm down. The duo accepted the cold drink and gulped it down in one go. When they were done, they let out a long sigh of relief. Suddenly, Zhen Xingming remembered something and asked, Silin, did Guan Feng come looking for you? The more Zhen Xingming thought about it, the more likely it seemed. They had just run into someone from AF1 and AF2 not long ago, and now they were running into Guan Feng today. How could there be such a coincidence? Plus, who was Guan Feng? There was no way he would run all the way to this poor little place just to chat with an old man. Guan Feng? Is that person called Guan Feng? Silin asked. Yeah, his name is Guan Feng. Zhen Xingming suddenly paused and looked around. I don't think the people down there can hear us if we talk here, can they? Silin nodded. The soundproofing here is pretty good. Zhen Xingming listened for a bit and confirmed that the soundproofing was pretty good before continuing. Guan Feng is a special teacher at AF1. He might look about the same age as Tuosen, but he's actually the same generation as my grandfather. I don't know how old he is, but his age is a mystery to me. Also, he's a member of Wing, and he's a high-ranking member at that. I think he has a military rank like Major General or something. I'm not sure, but don't underestimate him. He's taught a lot of princes and princesses of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, and even my father was once his teacher. He's a person who's been given special permission to not greet princes and princesses, much less us. Oh, and that Goryo from AF1 who shot at you earlier is Guan Feng's disciple. Goryo's marksmanship was taught by Guan Feng, and the Purgatory Thunder Snake E model bullets he's using are pretty good. However, Guan Feng uses the Purgatory Thunder Snake K model bullets, and that's the most difficult type of Purgatory Thunder Snake. You might be able to dodge Goryo's bullets, but there's no way you'll be able to dodge Guan Feng's K model bullet. I'm not trying to scare you, but you'll know when you actually head to AF1. Guan Feng is a very dangerous man. A shiver ran down Zhen Xingming's spine when he recalled how his father kicked him to AF1 to train him. Guan Feng is fucking inhuman. Sillin knew that Guan Feng was a dangerous man, but he was a little curious about the Purgatory Thunder Snake K model bullets Zhen Xingming was talking about. Bell heard Zhen Xingming's words and asked, "How do you know Guan Feng so well?" "I only know a little bit about him myself." Zhen Xingming spread his hands. Guan Feng has a bit of a relationship with the Zhen family, but it's only during my grandfather's generation. In my generation, it's just a weak teacher-student relationship. Maybe he doesn't want to acknowledge it at all. Why is that? Sillin asked. Bell curled his lip. Because everyone is too weak in Guan Feng's eyes. It's embarrassing, of course. Chapter 236. Bell and Zhen Xingming had a lot of opinions about Guan Feng, but it was obvious that they were more respectful of him than anything else. After all, Guan Feng could be considered an experienced man. Even his father's generation was his subordinate. No matter how arrogant they usually were, they wouldn't dare act recklessly in front of Guan Feng. While they were talking about Guan Feng, the doorbell rang. Sillin opened the door, and the triplets came over to take a look at Bell and Zhen Xingming. They said, "The big brother downstairs wants these two brothers to come over." "The big brother downstairs, big brother," Bell said seriously to the triplets, "you should call the man downstairs Grandpa." The triplets looked puzzled. They really didn't know why they were calling the young man downstairs Grandpa. They were going to call him Uncle, but they felt that it sounded too old. That was why they called him Big Brother instead. Zhen Xingming put a hand to his forehead. "Bell, we shouldn't be worrying about how we should address him right now. What do you think Guan Feng will do to us if he asks us to come downstairs?" Bell finally came to his senses and said with a conflicted look on his face, "He said he's not here to take us back." Zhen Xingming curled his lips. You can't understand Fox Guan's words with normal logic. Back in AF1, he was always thinking about how to torture us. If it wasn't for my strong willpower, I would have gone crazy a long time ago. No matter how unwilling they were, they had to go downstairs anyway. Bell and Zhen Xingming took 2 steps before they came back and pulled Sillin with them to bolster their courage. In the past, all 3 of them were scolded at the same time. Now that Oliganua was gone, the 2 of them had to endure too much firepower. However, Guan Feng didn't say anything about Bell and Zhen Xingming. He only said one thing, and it was enough to drive Bell and Zhen Xingming crazy. Guan Feng sipped his tea elegantly. "Let me tell you that AF3 semester exam is about to begin. I heard that it's harder this time, and those who miss or fail the exam won't be able to take a make-up test. They'll be demoted straight away." The corners of Bell and Zhen Xingming's eyes twitched again. They didn't doubt Guan Feng's words at all, but they had a feeling that the old man was the reason why the semester exam was harder this time. Most of the time, Belle and Jen Xingming would always return to the school during the semester exams no matter what they were doing. Even if they missed the exams, they could always take a make-up exam. Although the exams were a little difficult, Belle and Jen Xingming were smart enough to pass them every single time. But Guan Feng's words, of course. After he was done, Guan Feng looked at Silin and said, "I heard you dodged 4 of Goryo's shots." "No, he dodged 2 shots. The other 2 shots were blocked with his blade." Celine corrected him. Feng shook his head. "I failed if I didn't hit the target." Old Man Chang was smart enough to leave with the triplets when he saw Guan Feng talking to Silin and Silin. There were service robots inside the shop, so there were bound to be customers waiting for them. Old Chang wanted to arrange a room for them to talk in, but Ming Chen of Guan didn't. Guan Feng put down his cup and took out a suitcase with a wave of his hand. The box looked very ordinary, but when one touched it, one would realize that this box had a completely different tactile feel from an ordinary box. It was made of a rare metal alloy and was incredibly hard. It wouldn't be flattened even by a large aircraft. Guan Feng passed the suitcase to Silin. "This is a gift for you. There aren't many people around your age who can avoid a purgatory thunder snake." Silin didn't refuse the suitcase. Judging from what Belle and Jen Xingming had told him about Guan Feng, it was pointless to refuse. Guan Feng opened the suitcase toward Silin. There were 2 compartments inside, one of which contained some parts. Silin took a look and realized that they were probably gun parts. The other compartment was filled with some strange-looking metal pieces of different sizes. The front was a little sharp, and the back looked like the tail of an arrow. The thin metal pieces were probably filled with something else. To Belle and Jen Xingming's surprise, there was a picture of a lightning-like snake. It was the picture of a purgatory thunder snake. There was a K symbol in one of the corners of the suitcase. It was obvious what was inside the suitcase. Guan Feng had given a purgatory thunder snake to Silin and a Model K. They didn't understand why Guan Feng would do this. He should have given a purgatory thunder snake, the most basic Model B. What was the meaning of giving a Model K? Wasn't this a psychological blow? The suitcase's lid was opened at a 90-degree angle to the table, blocking Guan Feng's line of sight. Guan Feng didn't look at the suitcase. He simply stared at Silin and started moving his hands as he spoke. "I know that Griffin gave you a recommendation card, so this gift counts as a recommendation from me. However, it's up to you whether or not it works." Guan Feng's movements were too fast. Although Jen Xingming and Belle could catch some of his movements, they were completely disjointed. They missed far more movements than they caught. When Guan Feng's hands stopped moving, a short-barreled gun appeared in Guan Feng's hands. Guan Feng touched the gunshot wound with his finger. Belle didn't even see where he was touching, but the gun's color changed from bright white to a dull black. An old master really is an old master. Silin watched Guan Feng's movements with a calm expression on his face. He didn't look puzzled or surprised like Belle and Jen Xingming, so no one could tell what he was thinking. After he was done assembling the gun, Guan Feng picked a bullet. It was the metal plate. Guan Feng had picked the smallest one. After installing it, he tossed out the 7 small parts he had bought from Old Man Chang and fired without even taking the time to aim. The sound of metal hitting metal sounded almost at the same time. The 7 parts weren't thrown in a straight line. Most of them weren't in the same direction, but all of them were hit. The bullet was so fast that it hit the 7 parts one after the other while it was changing trajectories. In the end, it shot into the wall. The most surprising thing was Guan Feng's reaction speed. He had already calculated the angle and timing of the shot the moment he tossed the 7 parts into the air. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. It looked like Guan Feng had carelessly tossed out the parts and fired the gun again. The result was 7 hits in one shot. Guan Feng's hand flashed after he fired the shot, and the gun fell to the ground again. Moreover, the parts landed exactly where they were before they were assembled. He picked up his cup and drank from it again. His expression was exactly the same as before. It was as if he hadn't shot the gun at all. Sillin had been silent throughout the entire process, and it was only when Guan Feng closed the box that he raised his hand and accepted it. After he was done drinking, Guan Feng put down his cup and walked toward Belle and Zhen Xingming. Belle and Zhen Xingming immediately snapped out of their daze and tensed up when they saw this. Guan Feng walked in front of Belle and Zhen Xingming and patted their shoulders. He said gently, "Prepare yourselves. I hope your exams go smoothly." Then, Guan Feng walked out of the shop with a bag of things he had just bought. He drove away. Belle and Zhen Xingming were drenched in cold sweat. Old Fox Guan did it on purpose. It was a threat, wasn't it? Wasn't it? He said he hoped their exams go smoothly? Bullshit. Maybe he's thinking about some crazy questions for the exams. Belle, what do we do? Zhen Xingming asked with a bitter expression. What else can we do? We need to go back and prepare ourselves. We need to see if we can find any hints. It'll be embarrassing if old Fox Guan stops us from coming here. Not only will we be laughed at, my father will probably suppress us violently for the next few years. Sillin listened to their conversation and asked curiously, "You guys can find hints about the exams too?" Zhen Xingming pointed a finger in the direction Guan Feng had left earlier and said, "He told us that the exam this time would be more difficult, so the hidden meaning behind his words is that there's a leaked question. However, we'll have to find the leaked question and its hints on our own." So you're saying that the exams had already begun the moment he said those words? Belle nodded. That is correct. In fact, every year before the semester exams, everyone would spend their time and energy to search for hints about the exams, but the results were minimal. The three of us, the third one is a Leganuo, who I told you about before, the three of us would work together to search for hints before the exams so that we would have a higher chance of passing the exams. Zhen Xingming looked at Sillin sympathetically. If you go to AF1, the exams will be even more crazy. The hints will be given, but they're pretty hard to find. Sillin wasn't intimidated by this. In fact, he grew even more excited. This kind of exam was much more interesting than the one at Seven Lights. Many of the exams at Seven Lights were rigid, and the questions that could be used flexibly had a range of reference. Overall, they weren't difficult, and they were as simple as Sillin could be. It looks like AF1, AF2, and AF3's exam styles are different. After Guan Feng had left the parts market, he turned on a communicator installed on the car. His character is passable, and he's qualified to enter. Continue to investigate his background, it's fine. AF1 trains talents, identity is secondary. Guan Feng was holding a part he bought from Old Man Chong. It was a flying car part assembled from second-hand parts, and it was assembled by Sillin himself. The person on the other side of the communicator said something that made Guan Feng chuckle a couple of times. You know me best. I just want to use Sillin to provoke those kids. Belle and Zhen Xingming couldn't eat or sleep in peace because of Guan Feng's intimidation, so they left in a hurry the next day. They were still students after all, and they didn't have complete freedom. Old Man Chong didn't know who Belle, Zhen Xingming, and Guan Feng were. He had asked Sillin before, but Sillin had only told him that they were all upper-class people. Old Man Chong understood that the reason the trio had come here was because of Sillin. They were lucky enough to be able to bask in his glory, not to mention that they would be able to see 2 whirlwinds in their lifetime. As for their identities, it wasn't necessarily a good thing to know too much about them, especially for a commoner like Old Man Chong. There were some things that Old Man Chong didn't ask about after the trio had left. Instead, he talked to Sillin about Chong Xiaowu's education. Based on Chong Xiaowu's age, he should be able to receive elementary education at a school in the city. But with the knowledge he already possessed, he could absolutely go straight to an intermediate school. The top 3 schools in the Star region were allowed to give it a try. These schools would hold their preliminary exams on the internet during the special enrollment period. Even some students who were in the middle of their education would have a hard time answering the preliminary exam questions. It was obvious that these schools were very strict with their special enrollment. After the initial test, there was still a second test, an interview, and a series of other processes. If one was a noble, it would definitely be easier to get in if they had strong connections, but for someone like Chang Xiaowu, he would have to go through the same difficult path as Chang Xiaowu and Chang Xiaowu. Belle and Silin had discussed the education of the Chang family's children back at Baron Bader. From what Belle could tell, the prince was more than capable of sending them to the best schools in the Star region or even the imperial capital if they were willing to do so. But according to Silin's understanding of Chang Xiaowu, the kid was proud. He'd rather take the exam himself and be tested step by step than rely on Belle's strong connection. Silin had asked Chang Xiaowu about it, and just as Silin had expected, Chang Xiaowu had rejected him. He had decided to take the exam himself, and he would enter Baron Bader along with Chang Xiaosan and Chang Xiaowu. After all, there were people he knew there, and it would be more convenient for him to contact his family. According to the Grey Cat, it didn't matter which school Chang Xiaowu entered. What he lacked was a springboard, and Baron Batar, which was ranked in the top 10 of this star region, could be considered a good springboard for Chang Xiaowu to jump higher and further. One night, Huimao couldn't sleep and rolled around on his bed. "Silin, when can we go back? I still have stuff stored at the base. I don't know if Xueqiu and the Miantuan will steal it." He would never admit that he missed those guys. Silin let out a sigh and scratched Huimao's chin. "I don't know. Maybe a trip to the imperial capital could help him if he got to know more people." "Let's go to the imperial capital, Wheeze." "The imperial capital? That sounds like a good place to relax." "Oh right, I should pay AF1 a visit too." Huimao wanted to know how many idiots like Black Panther were in AF1. Okay. After making up his mind, Silin told old Chang his plan. His name was Alai, and he was also from the civilian district. He was a nice young man, and most importantly, he didn't have any bad intentions. After Silin left, he would be able to take care of old man Chang and the little ones. After all, there were many times when a robot couldn't replace a human. After everything was arranged, Silin and Huimao departed for the imperial capital of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire.